and Li didn't waste any more time upon hearing this, and he accepted the black box before sweeping his spiritual sense toward it. Even though restriction talismans had been plastered over the box, they weren't enough to completely obstruct his spiritual sense, and he still sensed something within the box. Hanli cast his gaze toward the crystal woman with a hint of surprise on his face. "Looks like you really do know some things," Han Li said as he narrowed his eyes. "I'm working off a lot of assumptions as well, so I certainly can't say that I know everything. Why don't you open the box to see if the item inside interests you? This is not a good place to talk. Let's go elsewhere first," the woman said with a smile. She then flipped a hand over, and a formation plate appeared over her palm. She glanced at the entrance of the shop before making a hand seal and chanting something, then pointing a finger toward the formation plate. Brilliant light instantly flashed from the formation plate, following which a vast expanse of 5-colored light swept forth in all directions, enshrouding Han Li and the woman within. Han Li raised an eyebrow at the sight of this sudden development. He could sense powerful spatial fluctuations from within the 5-colored light, but he remained still on the spot and made no attempt to evade. The light swirled around Han Li before forming a 5-colored light formation, and Han Li felt his surroundings abruptly blur before he found himself within a murky gray space. The space was extremely small, only just over 100 feet in size, and there was nothing in it aside from a table and a pair of chairs. At this moment, Han Li was standing atop a teleportation formation that was shimmering with 5-colored light alongside the woman. "This is a small spatial rift that I had someone open up for me. There won't be any danger of our conversation being eavesdropped on here. Of course, with your powers, even without the teleportation plate, it would be a simple task to force your way back to the original space," the crystal woman explained with an elegant smile. Han Li swept his spiritual sense toward the spatial walls around them, to find that this space was indeed quite secure, and he nodded in a content manner before sweeping a sleeve over the black box in his hand. A swath of azure light immediately flashed past, and the 2 talismans detached themselves from the box while the lid was flung open. A burst of black chi immediately swept forth from within, swirling around the box before attempting to spread into the surrounding area. However, Han Li seemed to have anticipated that this would happen well in advance. He merely opened his mouth in a composed manner to expel a swath of golden light, and as soon as the black chi was swept up by this light, it transformed into a black pillar of mist that was sucked straight into Han Li's stomach. What pure devilish chi! The golden light around Han Li's body intensified in brightness, as if it had been enhanced by the devilish chi he just swallowed. This black chi was devilish chi of an extremely high degree of purity, and for a cultivator like Han Li, who was using the Provenant's true devil arts, he was able to convert this devilish chi into magic power as long as he didn't ingest too much of it at once. A hint of astonishment flashed through the crystal woman's eyes upon seeing this. She was well aware of just how powerful the devilish chi emanating from the item in the box was, and every time she opened the box, she would have to make extensive preparations beforehand. Otherwise, if the devilish chi were to infiltrate her body, her cultivation base would be significantly damaged, and under worst-case scenarios, so could even die. At this moment, Han Li made a grabbing motion toward the box, and a black object flew out from within before landing in his grasp. This was a suit of purple armor that was around half a foot in size. Not only was it extremely sinister in appearance, there were several spikes protruding from the shoulder and knee sections of the armor. On top of that, its entire surface was filled with black patterns, and it was emanating immensely powerful devilish chi. This was a suit of armor that had undergone devilification. However, there was a large hole on the chest of the suit of armor, and the surrounding area was riddled with cracks, clearly indicating that it had been severely damaged. Han Li stared at the suit of armor in his hand, with a peculiar look on his face. With his mastery of the Provenant's true devil arts, he could naturally sense that this suit of devilish armor contained incredible power. This was definitely the most powerful suit of armor he had ever seen, and this was even after it had sustained such severe damage. If it could be fully repaired, it would truly be an unfathomably powerful suit of armor. With that in mind, Han Li's eyes began to shimmer with intrigue as he appraised the suit of armor. The suit of devilish armor is something I just so happened to come across, and in the beginning, I didn't know what it was either. However, after verification from many sources, I learned that this is a legendary suit of heavenly devilish armor. It appears that this is a suit of armor manifested by an extremely powerful heavenly devilish monarch. However, from the extensive damage suffered by the suit of armor, it's most likely the case that its former owner has already perished. Now, the suit of armor is most likely not even a tenth as powerful as it once was. However, if it were to be repaired, it should be able to recover around 20% to 30% of its former power, the crystal woman said with a smile. A heavenly devilish monarch. Those are devilish beings that are close to true spirit beings. It's no wonder that this suit of armor is imbued with such pure devilish chi. It's quite extraordinary that you were able to find something like this, Han Li said in a solemn manner. He then suddenly tossed the miniature suit of armor into the air, before casting a golden incantation seal onto it. The golden light disappeared into the purple suit of armor in a flash, following which it expanded to several times its original size. At the same time, the devilish chi emanating from it also became more powerful, and it began to sweep through the surrounding area. The crystal woman's expression changed slightly at the sight of the black chi surging toward her, and she abruptly raised a hand to send several white talismans flying through the air. The talismans then exploded to form a white light barrier, then shielded her within. A strange sizzling sound rang out as the devilish chi made contact with the light barrier, but it was kept at bay in the end. A hint of a smile appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. He abruptly made a hand seal, and brilliant golden light erupted from his body as golden halo emerged above his head, within which a projection with 3 heads and 6 arms gradually surfaced. The 3 heads of the projection were chanting in unison, while the 6 arms pointed a finger each at the suit of devilish armor at the same time. 6 pillars of golden light immediately surged forth, all of which struck the suit of purple armor. An astonishing scene then ensued. After being struck by the golden light, the suit of purple devilish armor rotated on the spot and disappeared. In the next instant, black chi swirled around the golden projection, and the purple armor somehow ended up on the projection's body. In the instant that the projection donned the suit of armor, its aura swelled to several times its original power. At the same time, black chi surged forth from its body, completely inundating the projection under a vast expanse of devilish chi. Han Li was ecstatic to see this. From this, he was able to deduce that the suit of armor hadn't lost all of its spiritual nature, and was thus able to be used by his provenance true devil arts. It was no wonder that this is the case. After all, the provenance true devil arts was a mysterious devilish cultivation art that originated from the elder devil realm in the first place. Even though elder devils were vastly different from heavenly devilish monarchs, both drew on true devilish chi as their essential source of power. Of course, if the suit of armor were completely unscathed with its spiritual nature fully intact, or if its owner were still alive, then it would be close to impossible for him to take it for himself. Han Li nodded with a wistful expression as he said, "This suit of armor does indeed suit me very well, but it's a pity that it's already been damaged. Otherwise..." The woman was quite stunned by the sight of the golden projection that Han Li had conjured up, but her expression remained calm as she replied, "If this suit of armor hadn't been damaged, then it most likely wouldn't have fallen into my hands. However, if you're willing to pay the price, then I have a way to repair it. At the very least, the suit of armor will be able to recover 20% to 30% of its former power. You can repair this suit of armor. Oh, I almost forgot that you were a crystal being, so repairing this armor certainly wouldn't be beyond your capabilities. What's this price that you're referring to? Also, how much do you plan to sell this suit of armor to me for?" Han Li asked with a smile. Following a brief pause for contemplation, the woman replied, "This item should be a priceless treasure, but it's a pity that it's a suit of devilish armor, so it can't be used by anyone who's not a devilish cultivator. Unfortunately, devilish cultivators have always been quite rare on Thunder Continent, and it's the first time I've ever seen a devilish cultivator of your cultivation base. Otherwise, this armor would have most likely have been sold already. How about this? If you have any precious materials, ingredients, pills, or medicines, bring them all out and thrown in a few top-grade spirit stones as well. If your offer is satisfactory, I can consider selling the armor to you." It's that simple. Han Li was rather surprised to hear her answer. The conditions she was proposing were far too simple considering what was being offered in exchange. The woman merely smiled and provided no response. "Can you tell me how you're going to repair this suit of armor first?" Instead of immediately accepting the offer, Han Li suddenly changed the subject. A slightly hesitant look appeared on the woman's face upon hearing this, but she heaved a faint sigh in the end and replied, "Repairing the armor is actually quite simple. As long as you have sufficient devilish cores, I'll be able to easily repair it." "Devilish cores? What are those?" Han Li asked with furrowed brows. This was the first time that he had heard of such a thing. "Devilish cores are the inner cores of high-grade devilish beasts. If we want to repair this suit of armor, it would at least require hundreds of devilish cores, all of which would have to be from upper-race devilish beasts. One of those devilish cores will act as the main material to repair the armor, and the higher the grade of that core, the better. Ideally, we'd use the inner core of a holy-grade devilish beast to serve that purpose," the woman said with a solemn look on her face. "Surely you jest, fellow Taoist. Where am I going to find so many high-grade devilish cores? And you're asking me to secure the inner core of a holy-grade devilish beast as well. Why does it feel like repairing this suit of armor will cost far more than what it takes to purchase it? You're not swindling me for an ulterior motive, are you?" Han Li asked with a cold expression. The crystal woman seemed to have anticipated Han Li's reaction, and her expression remained calm as she said, "You're wrongfully accusing me here, Senior. The enhancement the suit of armor will receive after being repaired is almost entirely dependent on the devilish core that is to be used as the main material. I can still repair it using devilish cores of a lower caliber, but the effect will be severely lackluster in comparison. If we were to use a holy-grade devilish core as the main material, the enhancement effect would at least be increased by twofold to threefold compared to if a lower-grade devilish core were to be used. If you want the best, then you naturally have to pay a high price. I have two avenues through which you can potentially secure a holy-grade devilish core, and I can disclose both of them to you if you're interested." "Two potential avenues. Go ahead," Han Li prompted. 3 months from now, the Lucky Cloud auction house of Cloud City will be selling a Holy Race Thorn Devilish Beast inner core as one of their auction items. From what I've heard, that devilish core is extremely rare, and even some of the Holy Race beings in the city have set their eyes on it," the woman disclosed in a slow voice. Han Li's brows furrowed upon hearing this. He did indeed possess considerable wealth, but he certainly wouldn't be confident that his wealth could exceed that of body integration stage beings. Those old monsters had all lived for tens of thousands of years, and the wealth they've accumulated during this time was most definitely quite staggering. Of course, if he exchanged all of the spirit medicines and materials he was carrying into spirit stones, he'd be able to keep up in the bidding with all those old monsters. But he was alone in an unfamiliar place, so it certainly wouldn't be wise to flaunt his wealth in such a blatant manner. If he were to do so, he'd most likely be singled out as a target even before he could purchase the devilish core. He didn't want to draw trouble to himself, and with that in mind, he quickly shook his head as he replied, "If there are going to be holy race beings participating in the bidding, then there's no way I'll be able to outbid them, so that won't work." "Oh, in that case, we'll have to take the second avenue. You must be quite new here in Cloud City, right, Senior? Have you heard of the Golden Devil Mountain Ranges?" the woman asked with a smile. "I know that such a place exists, but I don't really know anything about it," Han Li replied in a truthful manner. "It's not unusual for you to have limited knowledge about that place. It only appeared in the past 10,000 years, and very few people outside of Cloud City are aware of its existence. Allow me to tell you about it in greater detail," the woman chuckled. "Then I'll have to trouble you to enlighten me, fellow Taoist." Han Li nodded in response as the map he'd purchased earlier surfaced in his mind. The Golden Devil Mountain Ranges was none other than one of the landmarks annotated on the map. Approximately 10,000 years ago, a spatial storm suddenly appeared on a stretch of barren land about a month's travel away from Cloud City. For some reason, a set of black mountain ranges emerged in the area in the aftermath of the spatial storm. The mountain ranges were entirely enshrouded under dense devilish chi, and the space above it was extremely unstable with spatial rifts popping up quite regularly. Vast amounts of devilish chi surged from these spatial rifts, and some high-grade devilish beasts also emerged from them, including some holy-grade devilish beasts. Within a short span of time, the area in a radius of several millions of kilometers around the mountain ranges had been transformed into a devilish realm, and this area continued to expand. This incident eventually drew the attention of the holy race beings in our heavenly cloud races, and several holy race beings of the 6th and 7th tiers were deployed to the area, combing their powers to kill most of the holy-grade devilish beasts that had appeared there. After that, they ventured into the center of the mountain ranges to try and put an end to everything, the woman recounted with a solemn expression. Han Li's heart stirred as soon as the woman mentioned the vast amounts of devilish chi that had surged out of the spatial rifts, and he almost instantly thought back to the infernal river that he'd encountered back in the flying spirit race. The woman suddenly sighed at this moment before continuing. No one knows what those holy race beings encountered in the mountain ranges, but they stayed there for half a year before finally returning. After that, they issued an order to completely seal off the area using a restriction, leaving only a single entrance. They then sent news back to the heavenly cloud races, informing everyone that the matter had been resolved, and that there will no longer be any more devilish chi or devilish beasts emerging from the spatial rifts. They said that the demonic area was only going to maintain its current size and spread no further, but at the same time, they didn't allow any holy race beings to enter the area. Strangely enough, those with cultivation bases inferior to that of holy race beings were permitted to enter the area to kill the devilish beasts there, as well as to scour for inner cores and precious materials. However, there was only 1 month of each year during which the area could be accessed, and beings couldn't stay in there for a month at a time. After that, they'll have to leave the area, and as soon as the month passes, the exit will be closed. With the powerful devilish chi there, even devilish cultivators won't be able to stay in there for too long. Otherwise, they'll most definitely undergo devilification and turn into mindless devilish beings. At the same time, it really is a good place to secure precious materials that could be exchanged for spirit stones. So during the first few years, large numbers of high-grade beings would flock to the mountain ranges during the designated months. However, after a while, those numbers slowly dwindled, and at present, almost no one dares to enter the area anymore. Why is that? Han Li asked with a curious look on his face. The rate of deaths and casualties is simply far too high. Those who can return from the mountain ranges do indeed return with bountiful rewards, but only around 80% to 90% of beings return each year. During the first few years, this was not enough to deter adventurers, but this trend continued year after year. Even though large numbers of devilish beasts were being slain each year, the number of high-grade devilish beasts in there never seemed to dwindle, so of course everyone grew to fear the place. Not only are there countless high-grade devilish beasts in the devilish area, there are even a few holy-grade devilish beasts in there. Most of the time, they reside at the center of the mountain ranges, but if one were to encounter such a devilish beast, they were as good as dead. Truth be told, those who enter the mountain ranges don't even know if they're the ones hunting the devilish beasts or if they're the prey being hunted instead. Thankfully, the more powerful the devilish beast, the deeper they reside in the mountain ranges, so it's not easy to encounter them on the outskirts of the R. Otherwise, no one would dare to go in at all. As such, the Golden Devil mountain ranges gradually became a place that people loved to hate, the Crystal Woman explained with a smile. Have you told me all this because you want me to enter the area and kill the holy-grade devilish beasts in there? Han Li asked as he stroked his chin. His expression remained unchanged, but he'd already made up his mind. If this woman really were deranged enough to make such a suggestion, then he'd immediately depart from this place. The heavenly devilish armor was indeed very useful to him, but it certainly wasn't something that was worth risking his life for. The woman shook her head with a smile before replying, "The Golden Devil mountain ranges are extremely perilous, so I certainly wouldn't make such a suggestion. However, I was indeed hoping that you'd be able to obtain the devilish cores of one of the holy-grade devilish beasts in that area." "What do you mean?" Han Li asked with a perplexed expression. "From what I heard, a holy-grade devilish beast forced its way out of the Golden Devil mountain ranges over 100 years ago for some reason, then attacked several of the nearby towns. Several holy race beings were alerted to its rampage, and they combined their powers to severely wound the beast, but it managed to get away in the end. I just so happen to know where this devilish beast is lurking," the woman said with a mysterious look in her eyes, and Han Li was quite stunned by this information. "Is that true?" Han Li took a deep breath as he adopted a serious expression. "I'm most definitely telling the truth. The beast was severely wounded over a century ago, and it snuck back into an obscure location on the outskirts of the Golden Devil mountain ranges. It's been in hibernation ever since, and it possesses less than a tenth of its original powers. The only obstacle here is that it's created a devilish chi barrier, and only high-grade devilish cultivators who are also capable of controlling devilish chi can infiltrate through the barrier. Otherwise, any other being that comes into contact with the barrier will instantly rouse the beast from its slumber. That's why I haven't been able to do anything to it despite the fact that I've known its location all along. The price that I'm asking for to repair this suit of armor is the devilish beast's body, from which many materials can be derived. Of course, I'll be using its inner core as the main material to facilitate the armor's repair." If you think this is a fair arrangement, then I'll disclose the beast's location to you." The crystal woman put on a serious expression as she finally disclosed her condition. A contemplative look appeared on Han Li's face, and only after a lengthy silence did he finally ask, "Are you sure the beast is only lurking on the outskirts of the mountain ranges and possesses less than a tenth of its original powers? How did you manage to obtain this information?" Han Li was naturally quite tempted by the woman's proposal, but this was quite an important matter, so he had to get some answers first. "I can assure you that the information I have is accurate. I can see that you still have some doubts, so I'll show you something as proof." Rather than being disheartened by Han Li's questions, the woman was instead quite pleased, as this showed that Han Li was seriously contemplating her offer. Thus, she raised a hand, and a plume of black smoke suddenly shot forth from within her sleeve, then converged to form an object that hovered above her head. It was a fist-sized black bird with a fiery red beak and a pair of shimmering golden eyes. "That's a devilish smoke bird." Han Li immediately identified this bird, and he was initially quite stunned before coming to a realization. "Indeed, this is one of the extremely rare types of devilish beasts that I've been able to tame. It has no offensive prowess, but it's extremely proficient in searching for targets and traveling in a stealthy manner. I can even permanently bestow upon it a wisp of my spiritual sense to control it, and it's all thanks to this bird's observations that I was able to learn the condition and whereabouts of the wounded beast," the woman explained with a smile. "With such a bird under your control, I have no further suspicions. However, I must ask you some things. How was this holy grade devilish beast able to escape with its life in the face of multiple holy race beings? Does it possess a high cultivation base even among holy grade devilish beasts, or does it possess powers that outstrip its cultivation base? On top of that, would you be able to tell me what species of devilish beast it is?" Hanley nodded before delving into a detailed line of questioning. "I didn't witness the battle between the beast and the holy race beings, but apparently it's comparable to a second or third tier holy race being. Of course, I've only heard this from others, so the information may or may not be accurate. As for what kind of devilish beast this is, it's rather hard to say, but it seems to be similar to the legendary true spirit, the giant mountain ape. Perhaps it possesses that true spirit's bloodline," the woman replied. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon hearing this. A thought suddenly seemed to occur to the woman at that moment, and she raised a hand to toss a stone tablet at Han Li as she said, "I just so happen to have an image of the beast. You can have a look at it, senior." Han Li caught the stone tablet before pressing it against his forehead and injecting his spiritual sense into it. After a short while, Han Li lowered his hand with a contemplative look in his eyes and mused, "It really does bear a resemblance to a giant mountain ape." "I've already said everything there is to say. Have you made a decision yet, senior?" The woman turned to Han Li with a hint of anticipation in her eyes. However, Han Li merely smiled and asked her something that caught her a little off guard. "May I ask your name, fellow Taoist?" The crystal woman faltered slightly before smiling as she replied, "You can call me Xianxia, senior." "Xianxia," Han Li murmured to himself before nodding as he said, "Seeing as I don't have to venture deep into the Golden Devil mountain ranges, and the holy grade devilish beast has been severely debilitated, this is a risk worth taking. However, let me make this clear. If things aren't as you say they are, or I find that the undertaking is somehow riskier than I expected for whatever reason, I'll bail out right away. Also, on the day that the mountain ranges open up, I want you to come with me in person and lead the way. Lastly, if the holy grade devilish beast really does possess the bloodline of a giant mountain ape, you have to split half of its true spirit blood with me. If you don't agree to any of the aforementioned conditions, then the deal is off." And Li adopted quite a serious expression as he spoke. Xianxian contemplated his conditions momentarily before nodding as she replied, "All right, I accept those conditions." A smile appeared on Han Li's face in response to her prompt agreement. Thus, he spoke no further as he flicked his wrist, and a storage bracelet instantly flew out of his sleeve. He pointed a finger at the bracelet, and a swath of azure light instantly swept forth, following which a dozen or so vials and boxes of different sizes and materials abruptly appeared in midair. On top of that, there were also several tens of top-grade spirit stones that were shimmering with lights of different colors. At your current cultivation base, these pills and medicines should be enough to support your cultivation until the low and intermediate tiers of the upper race, and they can even assist you in breaking through bottlenecks. However, their effectiveness will differ from person to person. As for these materials, I expended a lot of effort to collect them. Take a look and see if they're to your liking," Hanley said in an indifferent voice. Many of these pills had been consumed by Han Li in the past, and he'd even brought out his remaining 2 vials of true toad liquid, so he wasn't afraid that the woman would be discontent with his offering. As for the materials, those were of a slightly lower caliber, but they had been obtained from the 2 spatial tempering stage demon beasts that he'd slain back in the Flame Coral Islands, so they were also extremely precious and rare. In contrast, the top-grade spirit stones really had been quite difficult to come by, even for him, and bringing out so many at once was far from a pleasant experience for him. As expected, after examining the pills and materials, a hint of elation appeared on the woman's face. All of these items are quite precious, and along with those top-grade spirit stones, there's certainly enough to exchange for this suit of devilish armor, the woman said with a smile as she stowed everything away. I'm glad to hear that. We have a deal then. I'll leave you with a myriad distance talisman, and I won't be leaving Cloud City anytime soon. When the Golden Devil Mountain ranges are about to open up, you can inform me using that talisman. Han Li smiled as azure light flashed from his storage bracelet at his behest, following which a palm-sized jade badge flew out from within. The storage bracelet then flew back as a streak of azure light, fitting itself around Han Li's wrist in a flash. All right, I'll remember to use the talisman when the time comes. The crystal woman nodded with a smile as she caught the jade badge. Han Li didn't say anything further as he made a hand seal and began to chant something. The golden projection and the suit of purple armor that it was wearing both disappeared in the flash, and at the same time, the nascent soul within Han Li's Danshan smiled as a purple suit of armor appeared over its chubby body. The rest of the process was quite simple. The woman teleported the 2 of them back to the shop using her formation plate, and Han Li immediately departed. He then visited some other shops that caught his interest, most of which were specialty shops that sold items like materials, treasures, and talismans. He did manage to find some noteworthy things in those shops as well, but of course, none of them could compare with the heavenly devilish armor he'd just obtained. Han Li stayed on this street for an entire day, and he only hailed a beast-drawn carriage to return to the inn after night had already fallen. In the half a month or so after that, Han Li did nothing aside from visiting these streets and hundreds of shops in Cloud City. Thus, he managed to gain a rough understanding of the various places across the city. At night, Xianxia would occasionally visit him for a conversation. During this period of time, the city appeared to be on high alert, but its inhabitants were actually quite relaxed, seemingly completely unfazed by the fact that the city was potentially going to come under attack soon. Perhaps this was due to the fact that they were already accustomed to attacks from the Jiaokai race, or perhaps they simply didn't think that the army of the Jiaokai race would make it to Cloud City. On this day, Han Li emerged from the inn as usual, but he didn't visit any more shops. Instead, he hailed a carriage and asked the driver to take him to Radiant Cloud Mountain. The beast-drawn carriage immediately began to race down the street, and it had to travel through most of Cloud City before finally arriving at the designated destination. Han Li disembarked from the carriage and looked up at the colossal mountain before him through narrowed eyes. This was a lush mountain that was over 30,000 feet tall, with a burst of pure spiritual qi emanating from it. It seemed to possess a top-grade spirit vein. Han Li looked around to find that there were 7 mountains of a similar size in the nearby area, and these 8 mountains formed the renowned 8 Cloud Mountains of Cloud City. It was said that a long time ago, a few unfathomably powerful beings in the city had unleashed extraordinary abilities to forcibly transport these 8 mountains from the ground down below all the way up to Cloud City. They then also captured 8 top-grade spirit veins and placed them into the mountains, thereby creating these 8 spirit mountains that were not inferior to any on the ground below. These 8 spirit mountains were also the only places in Cloud City where outsiders could permanently reside, and there were many cave abodes of different sizes on the mountains. None of these cave abodes were owned by a single being, and all of them were available for rent. Of course, the rent was extremely expensive, and the lease period was based on centuries. Even so, most of the cave abodes on the 8 mountains had been rented out, and there were even instances where demand exceeded supply. The temporary cave abode that Jia Tianmu had in Cloud City was situated in this Radiant Cloud Mountain. Han Li rose up onto the mountain as a streak of azure light, heading toward the address that Jia Tianmu had given him. The 8 Cloud Mountains were also the only places in Cloud City where beings were permitted to fly and use magic power. The reason why Han Li had come here was naturally for the so-called sentient puppets that had been promised to him by Jia Tianmu. During this period of time, Han Li had learned a lot about the myriad ancient race. Even though this race was only ranked somewhere around the middle of the 13 heavenly cloud races, their mastery of puppetry and puppet refinement had reached an incredible degree. It was said that they were one of the 3 races on the Thunder continent that were most proficient in the art of puppetry. Han Li was initially rather confused as to what these sentient puppets were, but after reading through some relevant tomes and learning about them from Xianxia, he finally understood what they were. These puppets all had to possess deity transformation stage power at a minimum, and they also possessed certain levels of spiritual nature. Even without having to inject spiritual sense into them, these puppets could carry out some simple instructions, so they were quite extraordinary indeed. On top of that, it was said that the spiritual natures of these puppets could evolve given the right conditions, and they could even develop a high level of intelligence. Of course, that was only a rumor. The myriad ancient race had never released an official statement to support or refute this claim, so these sentient puppets were given an extra layer of mystery and intrigue. Even for the myriad ancient race, these sentient puppets were quite difficult to refine, and they weren't sold to outsiders under normal circumstances. The few that did manage to somehow make their way out of the myriad ancient race were all highly sought-after items, and each puppet could be sold for an astronomical sum. Han Li was quite proficient in the art of puppet refinement himself, so he was naturally very intrigued by these extraordinary sentient puppets. Furthermore, he had some other objectives as well, and that was why he had decided to come to this place in person. After flashing through the air a few times as a streak of azure light, Han Li descended onto an obscure location halfway up the mountain. There was an ordinary-looking mountain face not far ahead of him, upon which a stone gate that was several tens of feet tall could be seen. Han Li didn't directly knock on the gate. Instead, he swept a sleeve through the air, and a ball of light flew out from within, then disappeared into the stone gate in a flash. Not long after that, white light flashed from the surface of the stone gate, and it slowly opened of its own accord. Jia Tianmu emerged from within with a smile on his face and greeted, "Haha, it really is you, fellow Taoist Han. What took you so long? I've been waiting for quite a few days already." Han Li smiled and replied, "Apologies for the delay. I had some matters to attend to, so I ended up coming a little later than expected." Jia Tianmu nodded before extending a warm invitation. "I see. Come into my cave abode and we'll talk in there." "I'd be glad to." Han Li accepted the invitation and strode into the cave abode. Jia Tianmu's cave abode wasn't very large. After passing through a short passageway, the two of them arrived in a hall that was over 300 feet in size. The decor was quite unique and elegant with a few shimmering beads embedded onto the roof, along with a table, 2 smaller side tables, and a few chairs in the room. Letter 1D4F, letter 1D667, letter 1D4E, letter 1D4E, letter 1D498, letter 1D4E, letter 1D486, letter 1D4EC, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4AT. There was nothing else in the hall aside from that, and even the walls had only been paved with the most ordinary bluestone. "Take a seat, fellow Taoist Han," Jia Tianmu offered after sitting down on the main seat. Han Li nodded before taking a seat beside him. Before even saying anything, Jia Tianmu suddenly clapped his hands together twice, and footsteps sounded from a side door, thereby drawing Han Li's attention toward that direction. Moments later, a beautiful woman who appeared to be in her 20s emerged into the hall. She was wearing a yellow palatial dress and was holding a long wooden box as she strode into the room in an elegant manner. The woman made her way to the center of the hall, then placed the wooden box in her hands onto the side table in front of Han Li before standing off to the side in a respectful manner. Han Li merely took a cursory glance at the wooden box before turning his attention to the woman with a peculiar look in his narrowed eyes. "Has my servant caught your eye, fellow Taoist Han? If you like her, how about I give her to you?" Jia Tianmu chuckled upon seeing this. "It's not that. I was marveling at just how extraordinary sentient puppets truly are. If it weren't for the fact that I'm also proficient in puppetry myself, I'd be fooled into thinking that this sentient puppet was an actual person. The spiritual pressure emanating from her body is remarkably similar to that of a normal cultivator," Han Li praised with a smile on his face. Not only was Jia Tianmu not dejected upon hearing this, he burst into hearty laughter instead. "Haha, so you figured it out, fellow Taoist Han. Tusk tusk, among the fellow Taoists who have visited my cave abode, You are definitely the first below the holy race to discover that this servant of mine is only a puppet. I refined this puppet myself many years ago, and it swindled many of my good friends since then." He seemed to be quite impressed that Han Li had been able to identify his servant as a puppet. "You're far too kind, fellow Taoist Jia. From the looks of it, this sentient puppet isn't very powerful, but it certainly does greatly resemble a human," Han Li mused with a smile as he appraised the puppet, which was virtually identical to a real human being. "You do indeed have a brilliant discerning eye, Brother Han. This is the first sentient puppet that I've ever refined, and it's only a third-tier upper race puppet. I decided to solely pursue crafting a sentient puppet with the most spiritual nature at the time, but unfortunately, even after I've nurtured the puppet for so long, its spiritual nature hasn't been enhanced in the slightest." Jia Tianmu sighed as he turned toward the servant with a wistful look on his face. At this moment, the servant suddenly turned and smiled at Jia Tianmu in an extremely humanized manner, but its smile then instantly faded as it adopted a blank and wooden expression again. Han Li was a little speechless upon seeing this. "Have a look at the sentient puppet in the box and see if you're happy with it, Brother Han," Jia Tianmu prompted after withdrawing his gaze from his servant. "All right, then I'll go ahead." Han Li nodded as he swept a sleeve over the table, and a swath of azure light surged forth. The long wooden box opened following a crisp crack, revealing the item within. Han Li focused his gaze on the item, and a hint of surprise appeared on his face. There was a white snake that was around a foot in length sitting inside the box. Its entire body was glittering and translucent, with a layer of white spiritual light radiating from it. "This is a new type of sentient puppet that I refined not long ago. It possesses a cultivation base that's roughly the same as yours at around the 7th tier of the upper race, but even though it's not all that powerful, it possesses 2 forms. If it weren't for the fact that you've saved my life, I really wouldn't be willing to part with this part," Jia Tianmu said with a slightly forlorn look in his eyes. 2 forms. Han Li was rather surprised to hear this. "Indeed, even though I haven't infused my blood essence into it to perform a master recognition ceremony, I can still show you its basic abilities." Jia Tianmu made a hand seal as he spoke, then pointed a finger toward the wooden box in Han Li's hands. A beam of white light immediately shot forth from his fingertip, disappearing into the white snake's body in a flash. Spiritual light flashed, and the motionless snake suddenly sprang to life. Brilliant white light erupted from its body, and it transformed into a streak of white light as it flew out of the wooden box. Immediately thereafter, it swelled drastically to become a white python that was several tens of feet in length before circling around in the air. The python had a pair of crimson eyes while its body was entirely covered in shimmering white scales. A violent aura was emanating from the puppet, and it really did seem to be completely identical to a real giant python. All of a sudden, Jia Tianmu let loose a low cry and made a hand seal before casting another incantation seal onto the snake. The giant python puppet shuddered as a result before curling up into a ball. Another flash of brilliant white light radiated forth, following which the white python transformed into a beautiful white-robed woman. In its female human form, the puppet wore a slightly lost expression as it hovered motionlessly in midair. "This sentient puppet can assist you in battle and also be used as a servant in your cave abode. Its only flaw is that it requires several times the number of spirit stones to function compared to other sentient puppets. On top of that, most of the puppet's body is constructed from glacial crystal iron, so it can only be powered by the extremely rare ice attribute spirit stones. If you want to use the puppet, you'll have to prepare to expend a lot of spirit stones on it in the future," Jia Tianmu explained. Han Li stared at the white-robed woman hovering in midair for a long while before smiling as he replied, "Ice attribute spirit stones are indeed quite rare, but I do have some in my collection, so I'd be more than happy to take the puppet." I'm glad that you're pleased with the puppet, Brother Han. You'll only need to use a drop of your blood essence to conduct a master recognition ceremony, and no one else will be able to use the puppet aside from yourself," Jia Tianmu said with a smile before making a hand seal, then pointing a finger at the puppet. The white-robed woman immediately swayed before flying toward Han Li as a ball of white light. It then transformed into a white snake that slowly descended into the box again. At the same time, Han Li rustled a sleeve, and a burst of azure light swept past to place the lid back onto the box. "Fellow Taoist Jia, from the sounds of it, all of these sentient puppets were created by you, so you must be an extremely well-established puppet refinement master. I also have some interesting puppets that were given to me by someone else. Would you like to see them?" Han Li turned to Jia Tianmu with a smile. "Oh, I'd love to see them. Jia Tianmu seemed to be genuinely excited at the prospect of witnessing a new type of puppets. Han Li smiled as he flipped his hand over, and a jade box appeared over his palm. The box was shimmering with spiritual light, and there were even a few restriction talismans plastered onto it. After peeling off the talismans, Han Li laid a hand onto the lid of the box, and it came flying off of its own accord, following which several tens of humanoid puppets flew out from within, each of which was around a foot in size. These were none other than the spirit servants that Han Li had received from demon monarch Daizu. As soon as these humanoid puppets flew to the center of the hall, a cloud of five-colored mist suddenly erupted forth. The mist then faded, and 12 seductive gorgeous women in five-colored dresses appeared in the hall. At the same time, 24 handsome young men appeared on either side of the hall, and all of them were holding different types of musical instruments as they sat in a cross-legged manner. Han Li hadn't cast any incantation seals, but a delightful, captivating symphony immediately rang out within the room. The beautiful women also began to dance along to the music. Their five-colored dresses fluttered as they flaunted their slender figures, and a peculiar fragrant aroma wafted through the air. Jia Tianmu's eyes abruptly widened as soon as those humanoid puppets appeared, and he stared intently at them with rapt focus in his eyes. After a long while, the captivating music drew to a halt, and the 12 female dancers also stood still on the spot with their hands by their sides. They are indeed quite interesting. The spiritual sense within these puppets doesn't belong to you, does it, fellow Taoist Han? Jia Tianmu asked with an intrigued look on his face. So you've noticed that as well. These puppets are known as spirit servants, and they're half-spirit, half-object entities. They're different from sentient puppets in that they're refined from infusing a type of spirit body into a puppet. However, they function much the same as sentient puppets in that they have a certain, albeit limited, degree of autonomy, and there's no way to further enhance their spiritual nature after they've been refined, Han Li explained with a smile. An elated look appeared on Jia Tianmu's face upon hearing this, and he immediately asked, I've thought of trying to fuse spirit bodies and puppets as one, and I've conducted several experiments to try and make that a reality, but none of them have succeeded. What kind of spirit body was infused into these spirit servants? I didn't refine these spirit servants myself, so I'm not too sure what kind of spirit bodies were infused into them. However, I'm sure that you'll be able to separate the spirit bodies from these puppets and identify them, Han Li replied as he stroked his chin. That's true. Wait, you're giving these puppets to me. Jia Tianmu nodded in response before suddenly realizing what Han Li was implying. These spirit servants are quite interesting, but they serve no purpose for me. In contrast, you have brilliant mastery in the art of puppetry, so perhaps you'll be able to make good use of them to further better yourself, Han Li said in a calm manner. These spirit servants are indeed extremely useful to me, but I can't just accept such a precious gift from you. How about this? I have some wealth on my hands at the moment, so I'll purchase them from you instead, Jia Tianmu insisted as he shook his head. If you really want to offer me something in return, then I have a few questions to ask you. If you can answer those questions, I'd be more than satisfied. Han Li finally disclosed his objective. Jia Tianmu faltered upon hearing this before responding in a cautious manner. Questions. Feel free to ask me anything, Brother Han. However, if what you're asking has anything to do with confidential information in our 13 heavenly cloud races, then forgive me for not being able to answer them. Of course, my questions definitely won't be related to any sensitive subjects, Han Li assured with a smile. Jia Tianmu's expression eased upon hearing this, and he nodded as he said, Then go ahead, Brother Han. During the past few days, I heard from someone that there seems to be a teleportation formation capable of facilitating teleportation between continents in the heavenly cloud races. Is that true? If so, which race is it being controlled by? Han Li asked. Jia Tianmu was clearly rather taken aback by Han Li's question, and he relaxed even further as he replied. There is indeed such a teleportation formation, but it's not being controlled by any single race. Instead, it belongs to several races among our 13 heavenly cloud races. Which races do the teleportation formation belong to? Han Li asked. Due to the fact that the teleportation formation needs to be kept in good condition, it's often serviced, and that's taken care of by the crystal race, the stone cocoon race, the multi-hand race, and our myriad ancient race. Fellow Taoist Han, are you interested in the teleportation formation itself, or are you interested in using it? Jia Tianmu asked with a thoughtful expression on his face. Jia Tianmu was extremely proficient in the art of puppetry, so he certainly wasn't a dense idiot. As such, he was able to instantly glean Han Li's intentions. I do indeed wish to use the teleportation formation to get to another continent. As things currently were, Han Li saw no point in hiding the truth, so he decided to come clean. It'll be quite difficult for you to access the teleportation formation, Brother Han. Jia Tianmu chuckled with a wry smile and shook his head. I'm aware that using this teleportation formation requires the expenditure of a vast amount of energy, but I just wanted to ask if it's possible for me to secure approval to use this teleportation formation as an outsider, Han Li asked in a slow voice. His expression remained unchanged, but he was actually quite nervous to hear the answer. After all, this his main objective for visiting Jia Tianmu. After a brief pause, Jia Tianmu replied, "Truth be told, if you were a holy race being from one of our heavenly cloud races, then it certainly wouldn't be difficult for you to request access to the super teleportation formation. Seeing as you satisfy neither of those criteria, it'll be extremely difficult for you. However, with an invasion from the Jiao Kai race almost an imminent inevitability, there's a slight chance that an exception could be made. If you make some significant contributions for the heavenly cloud races in the battle against the Jiao Kai race army, then perhaps there's a chance that access could be granted to you. However, I'm only responsible for puppet refinement, so you'll have to discuss the specific details with the elders. On top of that, due to the imminent battle, our 13 races are all inviting guest members. I've already told the elders about how you were able to easily slay several Jiao Kai beings of the same cultivation base, and they're quite interested in you as well." Han Li's brows furrowed tightly upon hearing this. With his personality, the last thing he wanted to do was to become embroiled in a battle between two major powers. In such a large-scale battle concerning so many powerful beings, even a being of his powers could easily perish. "Thank you for this information. I'll be sure to consider my options carefully. I'll have to trouble you to act as the middleman if I ever wish to request an audience with the elders of the 13 races," Han Li requested with a serious nod. "That's no problem at all, especially after you've given me such a precious gift," Jia Tianmu replied without any hesitation. A smile appeared on Han Li's face upon hearing this. After that, Han Li spoke no further about the teleportation formation, instead choosing to discuss puppetry with him. As soon as the discussion moved on to puppets, Jia Tianmu's eyes immediately lit up, and he became a lot more talkative as if a whole new can of worms had been opened. With his astonishing mastery in the art of puppetry, many of his insights quite brilliant even to Han Li, and Han Li learned a lot from their conversation. In contrast, Han Li had obtained the puppetry technique from the monarch of Soul Divergence, so he also had some unique insights to offer, much to the surprise and elation of Jia Tianmu. Half a day later, Han Li departed from Radiant Cloud Mountain and returned to the inn. As soon as he entered his room, Han Li activated the restriction he'd set up to completely seal off the place. He then casually strode over to a corner of the room before sitting down in a cross-legged manner. He hadn't found the answer that he was looking for, but he did gain a better understanding of the super teleportation formation, as well as a very versatile sentient puppet. Han Li swept a hand over his storage bracelet. An azure light flashed as a long wooden box appeared in his hands. He gently removed the lid to reveal the thin white snake that was lying inside, and blue light flashed through his eyes as he attempted to glean the internal structure of the puppet. However, this sentient puppet really was quite special. Even after using his bright sight spirit eyes, its vitals were still quite blurry to him, and he couldn't make any sense of how this puppet functioned. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he immediately released his powerful spiritual sense to encompass the entire snake. He directed his spiritual sense toward those blurry vital regions, only for it to be forcibly repelled. The other sections of the white snake were quite similar to normal puppets aside from the fact that some special materials had been used. Some of the internal structures were also quite profound, but he was able to figure out how they worked, albeit with some difficulty. It appeared that the areas that truly set sentient puppets apart lay in those blurred-out regions that he couldn't see. It wasn't that he couldn't use his powerful spiritual sense to forcibly infiltrate those areas, but doing so would definitely inflict some damage to the puppet. Furthermore, if he could do this, then other beings who had been in possession of sentient puppets in the past would also have been able to do the same thing. However, the secret of sentient puppets was still one that was exclusively kept in the myriad ancient race, so that course of action clearly didn't work. It would most likely damage the puppet, yet leave him still unable to glean its secrets. After a brief hesitation, Han Li finally decided against taking the risk and turned his attention to conducting a master recognition ceremony instead. With that in mind, he opened his mouth to expel an azure thread, which revolved around his wrist before disappearing into his body again. At this moment, Han Li extended his wrist forward. An azure light flashed as a few drops of blood essence dripped from his wrist down onto the white snake in the box. The drops of blood essence only came into contact with the snake's body for a split second before vanishing. Immediately thereafter, Han Li made a hand seal and cast a series of incantation seals onto the white snake. As a result, the motionless white snake suddenly raised its head, and a hissing sound came out of its mouth. The puppet then flew out of the box before flying around in the air before Han Li. However, Han Li paid no heed to it as he flipped his hand over again to produce a stack of formation plates of different colors. He raised a hand, and all of the formation plates shot forth as balls of spiritual light, then disappeared into the nearby space. In the next instant, a five-colored light formation that was around 10 feet in size appeared in midair. There were runes of all colors shimmering within the formation, presenting quite a mystical sight to behold. Han Li pointed a finger at the white snake before him, and red light flashed through its eyes as it circled around in the air in a hesitant manner. However, it was unable to resist the power of Han Li's spiritual sense in the end, and it slowly flew into the light formation. A dull ringing sound rang out across the entire formation at Han Li's behest, following which countless runes appeared before surging toward the puppet in a frenzy. A layer of crimson light surfaced over the puppet's body, but it remained completely motionless, allowing these runes to fuse into the crimson light. A hint of elation appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. This master recognition technique was something that he had learned in the Tian Peng race, and it was far more effective than other conventional methods. After using this technique on the puppet, even a being that was vastly more powerful than him wouldn't be able to wrest control over the puppet. Han Li activated the formation while slowly closing his eyes, leaving the light formation to flash incessantly as it hovered in midair. This master recognition ceremony lasted for a day and a night before Han Li finally opened his eyes again. He then began to chant something as he waved a hand toward the white snake within the formation, and brilliant white light erupted from its body as it flew out of the formation in a flash. It twirled in midair before transforming into a white-robed woman, upon which it descended slowly beside Han Li in a silent and expressionless manner. A hint of intrigue appeared in Han Li's eyes as he appraised the woman's gorgeous features, and he smiled as he mused, "Looks like you really don't possess a high level of spiritual nature. You're just like a humanoid doll. I'm going to call you doll from now on." Red light flashed through the white-robed woman's eyes upon hearing this, but she still remained completely motionless. Han Li shook his head in a slightly resigned manner upon seeing this. He made a hand seal, and spiritual light flashed from the woman's body as she transformed into a white snake again, then disappeared up his sleeve. He then pointed at the light formation again, and it immediately vanished, reverting back to a dozen or so formation plates again, all of which were stowed away into Han Li's storage bracelet. After a brief contemplative pause, he pulled out another white jade box, upon which several crimson talismans were plastered. Letter 1D6 letter 1D563, letter 1D4 1E, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D430, letter 1D556, letter 1D41C, letter 1D698, letter 1D5FA. This was none other than one of the mysterious boxes that the big-headed being had entrusted to everyone. From the caution with which the big-headed being had treated the boxes with, and the efforts that the Jiao Kai race was making to secure them, it was not difficult to deduce that they contained extremely important items. However, due to the fact that an extremely potent restriction may have been set up on the box, Han Li hadn't gotten around to attempting to open it. Now that it was essentially necessary for him to request an audience with the elders of the myriad ancient race, he naturally had to figure out the contents of the box first to see if there was something in it that he could use. Han Li could sense that the item in the box was extremely important to the myriad ancient race. In that case, there was a chance that he could use it to exchange for an opportunity to use the super teleportation formation. Of course, Han Li wouldn't be willing to hand over the box to the myriad ancient race without inspecting its contents first. Only with the knowledge of just what this item was could he barter effectively with the myriad ancient race. With that in mind, Han Li glanced at the walls of his room, which were shimmering with faint white light, and his brows furrowed slightly. If opening the Jade box were to create a massive ruckus, then the restriction he'd set up may not be enough to completely conceal the commotion. As such, he had to set up a few more layers of restrictions first. Thus, Hanli pulled out several sets of formation flags from his storage bracelet again, all of which were sent hurtling toward the corners of the room. Immediately thereafter, a layer of azure light and a layer of five-colored light appeared in unison. Even after setting up the two additional barriers, Hanli still wasn't content. He thrust a hand into the air, and a black shadow shot forth from his palm, transforming into a miniature black mountain that was only around a foot tall hovering above his head. Spiritual light flashed, and a layer of gray light emanated from the underside of the miniature mountain, forming a light barrier that encompassed an area with a radius of several tens of feet around Hanli. Thus, the area around Hanli was in complete lockdown. Hanli had already examined the crimson talismans plastered to the surface of the box. They were nothing special, and were only used to repress the aura of the item inside the box. On top of that, he had already formulated a plan to remove these talismans. For others, this would most likely prove to be quite a troublesome prospect, but he possessed several abilities that were extremely effective against restrictions. Thus, after securing his room with a series of light barriers, Hanli tossed the Jade box into the air, where it hovered motionlessly at his behest. He then reached out with a pristine white hand toward the Jade box, while the divine essence-effused light barrier being emitted by the miniature mountain became noticeably denser. At the same time, 5 white skulls emerged from his fingertips, all of which swelled in size before hurtling toward the Jade box. "Break!" Hanli issued a command as he pointed at the 5 skulls, and all of them opened their mouths in unison to expel a wave of 5-colored glacial flames that swept up the Jade box within. An astonishing scene then ensued. As the 5-colored glacial flames converged toward the box, the crimson talismans detached themselves from the box's lid of their own accord. The talismans should have been quite light and sprightly, but due to the effects of the 5-colored glacial flames, they were moving a lot more slowly than they normally would, and Hanli was able to clearly see the process through which they were separating from the box. This brief period of time was enough for Hanli to assess all of the changes taking place within the box. All of a sudden, his expression darkened, and the 5-colored glacial flames surging around the Jade box transformed into a massive 5-colored hand, which forcibly removed the lid on the box. A burst of extremely unstable yet powerful fluctuations erupted from the box into the air, following which a golden ball of light shot forth, only to be caught in and completely immobilized by the 5-colored hand. Right at this moment, a resounding thump rang out as a red light formation surfaced around the Jade box. The formation then swelled and shrank, looking as if it were about to explode. Hanli glanced at the light formation, and the terrifying spiritual power imbued within it was quite harrowing even to him. Thus, he immediately made a hand seal, and the massive 5-colored hand locked firmly around the golden and silver ball of light before whizzing toward the corner as a streak of 5-colored light. At the same time, the divine essence-effused light in the nearby area suddenly tightened to form a dense gray pillar of light that trapped the light formation within. In the next instant, the light formation exploded, and a white halo immediately appeared within the pillar of light. The pillar of light then began to tremor violently as a series of strange ripples appeared over its surface, looking as if it were going to be vanquished at any moment by the force of the explosion. Hanli's eyes narrowed as he harumphed coldly, and he opened his mouth to expel a ball of silver flames. The fireball transformed into a silver fire raven that rushed into the gray pillar of light in a flash before plunging headfirst into the halo of white light. A bizarre turn of events then unfolded. The violent fluctuations that resembled an erupting volcano within the white halo of light suddenly receded, and at the same time, the halo of light shrank drastically at a rate that was discernible to the naked eye. Within just the span of a few breaths, it had disappeared completely, and in its place was the silver fire raven. The bird had swelled to several times its original size, and it was in the process of sucking one final wisp of white light into its stomach. Hanli finally heaved an internal sigh of relief upon seeing this. He waved a hand, and the silver fire raven spread its wings before flying back to him, disappearing into his body in a flash. Meanwhile, the 5 white skulls also vanished amid a string of dull thumps. At the same time, the 5-colored hand in the air appeared above his hand, then relaxed its fingers to release that ball of golden and silver light. Hanli swept a sleeve upward, and a swath of azure light swept forth to draw the golden ball of light into his grasp. As he clenched his fingers around it, the golden and silver light dimmed to reveal the object within. He held his hand up to his face, then focused his gaze to conduct a more thorough inspection. There was an antiquated badge that appeared to be around half a foot in length within the spiritual light. One side was shimmering with golden light while the other glowed with silver light, and the surfaces of the badge were riddled with profound ripples. At the same time, there was an unidentifiable ancient symbol carved onto each side of the badge. Even with Han Li's vast wealth of knowledge in foreign languages, he was still completely unable to figure out from which language these symbols originated. Han Li stroked the surface of the badge gently with his finger, and a hint of surprise appeared on his face. To think that the item that the big-headed being had held in such high regard was something like this. Even though the badge was shimmering with spiritual light, there were some signs of wear and tear around its edges, indicating that it was definitely quite an old item. Furthermore, the material used to forge the badge was also quite strange. One side was frosty cold to the touch, while the other side was scorching hot, indicating that it seemed to possess both ice and fire attributes at the same time. Han Li fell into deep thought upon seeing this. However, as he swept a finger over one of the ancient symbols, something unexpected happened. A wisp of white light suddenly emerged from within the badge, and it was as thin as a strand of fine silk, but it was extremely fast and disappeared in a flash. A cold sensation shot through his palm, followed by a faint hint of stabbing pain. His hand then became a little moist and clammy, and in his bewilderment, Han Li reflexively tossed the badge into the air, where it hovered motionlessly above his head. He then brought his palm up to his face to find that there was a gash that was several inches long on his palm. The gash was bleeding profusely, and it seemed that he wouldn't be able to immediately stop the bleeding. With his powerful body in conjunction with the fact that this hand had cultivated the 100 Meridian Refinement mantra, it was quite incredible that a thin white thread could inflict such a nasty gash onto his palm. Despite the astonishment in his heart, Han Li immediately began to circulate his magic power within his body. Specks of white light began to emanate from the gash, following which it was fully healed in just a few moments. After that, he glanced up at the strange badge overhead with intrigue and bewilderment in his eyes. At this moment, brilliant golden and silver light were radiating from the badge, and the traces of blood on it were rapidly vanishing. No, they weren't vanishing. They were being absorbed by the badge. Han Li's lips twitched, yet before he had a chance to do anything, the badge suddenly let loose a long cry akin to that of a dragon's roar. Immediately thereafter, a pillar of golden and silver light erupted into the air, completely disregarding the divine essence-effused light and the restrictive light barriers that he'd set up earlier, then puncturing the roof and climbing straight into the heavens. Han Li's expression instantly darkened significantly upon seeing this. He immediately waved a sleeve through the air, and a swath of azure light swept forth from within as he attempted to recover the badge. However, an incredible turn of events then unfolded. Even as the azure light swept toward the badge, it completely refused to budge, and it only continued to blast a pillar of golden and silver light into the sky. Han Li's heart sank as a wry smile appeared on his face. With the massive commotion that this badge was causing, there was no way that what he was doing would go by unnoticed. It wouldn't take long before someone came to investigate what was going on. With that in mind, a series of thoughts flashed rapidly through Han Li's mind, and he immediately sprang into action. Specks of light of different colors instantly appeared out of thin air at his behest, and he instantly stowed away the miniature black mountain, as well as the formation plates he'd set up earlier. He then paused before making his way toward a corner of the room, where he sat down expressionlessly in a cross-legged manner, paying no further heed to the badge that was hovering in midair. A short while after, light flashed from the four walls and the door of the room at the same time, following which a few black-armored warriors of Cloud City emerged in the room in a wraith-like manner. All of them faltered slightly at the sight of the badge that was causing such a big commotion, then turned to Han Li in unison with a cold look in their eyes. However, their expressions then changed slightly after verifying Han Li's cultivation base with their spiritual sense to find that he was far more powerful than them. The leader of the armored warrior adopted a slightly more benevolent expression as he asked, "Is that your treasure? Are you not aware that activating powerful treasures and using too much spiritual power is prohibited in Cloud City?" Seeing as Han Li's cultivation base was far superior to theirs, They didn't dare to show him any disrespect before figuring out what was going on. I encountered some issues while refining this treasure, but I'll sort things out right away. Han Li was quite calm and collected, and he made a grabbing motion toward the badge from afar as he spoke. A massive translucent hand instantly appeared in the air before grabbing down toward the badge. However, despite Han Li's best efforts to drag the badge down toward him, it refused to move so much as a single inch, as if it were completely locked in space somehow. Confused expressions appeared on the faces of the armored warriors in the room upon seeing this, and Han Li's lips also twitched in response to this situation. He took a deep breath, and just as he was about to exert more force on the badge, an indifferent male voice suddenly sounded from outside the room. "Don't bother. The vast glacial badge has already been activated by you in advance, and it's locked onto a spatial position, so it won't move no matter what you do to it unless you shatter all of the space in a radius of 1,000 feet. As soon as the voice trailed off, spatial fluctuations rippled throughout the room, and an indistinct humanoid figure emerged out of thin air. All of the armored warriors' expressions changed upon seeing this humanoid figure, and they bowed in unison as their leader greeted in a respectful manner. The members of the 73rd Enforcement Squad pays their respects to Elder Bai. The humanoid figure was a man in a brocade robe who appeared to be quite young, but both his hair and beard were snowy white in color. There's no mistaking it. This is indeed a vast glacial badge. Tusk, I thought that all of these badges had fallen into the hands of the Jiao Kai race, but who would have thought that there'd be one here? In contrast with his snowy white hair and beard, the man had a pair of thick black eyebrows. There was an elated expression on his square face, and he paid no heed to anyone else as he stared up at the shimmering golden and silver badge hovering in midair. Han Li was seated in the corner, and his expression abruptly changed as he swept his spiritual sense toward this newcomer. This man's spiritual power was quite unfathomable, indicating that he was a body integration stage being. The man withdrew his gaze, then waved a hand toward the armored warriors before turning his attention to Han Li. "Are you the one who activated this vast glacial badge?" "I want to deny that, but it doesn't really seem possible at this point." Han Li sighed with a wry smile on his face. "Why would you deny this? You've encountered a massive stroke of luck," the man said with a hint of a smile on his face as he appraised Han Li through narrowed eyes. "A massive stroke of luck? What do you?" Han Li's expression changed slightly, yet just as he was about to ask a question, the man's brows furrowed as he abruptly turned toward one of the walls of the room. "Brother Kang Ying, seeing as you're already here, why don't you show yourself? Are you planning to hand over this vast glacial badge to our water wraith race?" Not many vast glacial badges have appeared on this occasion, so every single badge is extremely valuable. Would your water wraith race dare to take one for yourselves? Without the myriad ancient race to set up and activate the required formation, the badge will be useless to you even if you do take it, a cold voice replied. A black shadow then flashed on the wall that the white-haired young man was staring at, following which a shadowy figure that was enshrouded under gray light appeared in a soundless manner. The figure was standing close to the wall, completely motionless, as if it were an insubstantial object. The cold voice just then had sounded directly from within the gray light. As opposed to becoming enraged, the white-haired man merely chuckled. "He, I'm naturally aware of this. However, if this fellow Taoist wishes to join our water wraith race, then it won't be an issue for us to use this vast glacial badge to take some of our brethren into the vast glacial realm, right? That would be fine, of course, but this fellow Taoist doesn't seem to have expressed any intention of joining your race. Perhaps he'd rather become a guest member of our yin demon race." The shadowy figure referred to as Kang Ying replied in a completely emotionless voice. "Is that so? That's rather hard to say. If I recall correctly, there is an unspoken rule among our 13 races. If two races set their eyes on an outsider at the same time, the other race can only extend an invitation after said outsider has rejected the invitation from the first race. Fellow Taoist, I am Bai Yue of the Water Wraith race, and I'm officially extending an invitation to you to become a guest member of our race. If you're willing to join our race, I can promise you that we'll help you advance a tier in your cultivation base within 100 years, and we'll also offer you a variety of other immense benefits." The white-haired man turned his gaze away from Kang Ying and extended a formal offer to Han Li. However, he stared intently into Han Li's eyes as he spoke, and a strange iridescent light rapidly swirled within his own eyes, seemingly emitting an invisible power that threatened to suck away the beholder's sense of reason. Han Li's eyelids twitched, and as soon as he looked into Bai Yue's iridescent eyes, his spiritual sense blurred, and almost reflexively opened his mouth to accept the offer being extended toward him. However, in the next instant, he activated his great development technique, and his pupils contracted as piercing blue light appeared in his eyes, thereby allowing him to resist the strange, captivating force of the white-haired man's eyes. At the same time, Han Li regained clarity in his spiritual sense, following which a burst of fury welled up in his heart. This white-haired young man appeared to be quite honest and benevolent, yet he had used a captivation technique to try and sway Han Li's decision. If it weren't for the fact that he possessed his bright-sight spirit eyes, he would have most likely been drawn into accepting his offer just then. The white-haired young man faltered upon seeing this before a hint of surprise appeared on his face. Kang Ying was also rather taken aback by this development, but he then burst into laughter as he said in a derisive tone, "Haha, I didn't think that your iridescent illusionary eyes would fail to take effect on a being below the holy race. Stop trying to play your little tricks, fellow Taoist Bai. As you said yourself, the rule stipulating that invitations had to be made in sequential order to outsiders is only an unspoken one. In the face of the vast glacial badge, none of our 13 races would be willing to follow an unofficial rule like that." The white-haired man's expression quickly returned to normal, and he cast a meaningful glance toward Han Li before turning to Sinag Ying. "Seeing as this fellow Taoist has no intention of joining our water wraith race, I naturally won't force him to do so against his will. Brother Kang Ying, aren't you going to try and invite this fellow Taoist to join your yin demon race? This matter concerns a vast glacial badge, which is an item of the utmost importance, so neither of us can decide which race he will join. In that case, I'm not going to waste my efforts doing something that won't lead to anything," Kang Ying harumphed in response. Bai Yue merely smiled and remained silent upon hearing this. Kang Ying also chuckled as he fell silent as well. As for Han Li, he also refrained from saying anything as the blue light in his eyes faded. Thus, the room became extremely silent, and the nearby armored warriors were left staring blankly at one another, wondering what they should do in this situation. However, this silence was broken just moments later. The sound of knocking suddenly rang out from the other side of the door, following which an elderly voice sounded. "I am Kyan Jizzy of the myriad ancient race. Would I be able to see the owner of this place?" Bai Yue's face paled slightly upon hearing this elderly voice, and the gray light around Kang Ying's body rippled unsteadily as well. Han Li immediately replied, "Please come in, senior. It is a great honor for me to welcome you to my humble abode." Upon hearing Han Li's polite response, the elderly man didn't delay any longer. Spiritual light flashed, and he passed directly through the door, appearing in the room in the next instant. This was a chubby yellow-robed elderly man with a strange woven basket on his back. He wasn't very tall, and he had a set of benevolent facial features. "Fellow Taoist Bai, fellow Taoist Kang Ying, I didn't expect to see you two here," the elderly man greeted in a warm voice, as if he really were only just finding out that these two beings were in the room. "Greetings, fellow Taoist, the two of us have only just arrived as well." "Indeed, I just so happened to be doing something nearby, and I noticed the phenomenon resulting from the activation of the vast glacial badge, so I decided to come and have a look." Bai Yue and Kang Ying were regarding each other with enmity just a moment ago, but in the face of this elderly man, both of them were behaving in an extremely careful manner. Han Li was naturally rather intrigued by their sudden changes in demeanor, and he swept his spiritual sense toward the elderly man, upon which a wave of shock surged through his heart. This Kyan Jizzy's magic power was as boundless as the ocean, and it was completely unfathomable to Han Li. At the very least, he was unable to glean the elderly man's cultivation base as he currently was, which meant that the elderly man was most likely a being at the pinnacle of the body integration stage. It was no wonder then Bai Yue and Kang Ying were so wary of him. Even if the two of them were to combine their powers, they'd most likely still be no match for the elderly man. "So there really is a vast glacial badge here. Does this badge belong to you, fellow Taoist?" Kyan Jizzy gave the two a benevolent smile, then glanced at the golden and silver badge hovering in midair before turning to Han Li. "Indeed, senior," Han Li hurriedly replied with a respectful bow. "Your surname is Han, right?" Kyan Jizzy suddenly asked with a smile. "How did you know that, senior?" Han Li's expression changed slightly, and even though he was asking that question, he most likely knew the answer already. As expected, Kyan Jizzy smiled and replied, I've heard about you from fellow Taoist Jia, and I also have your portrait. I was going to send someone to invite you for a chat a few days from now, but it looks like I have no choice but to meet you a little earlier than expected." "You recognize him, fellow Taoist Xianxia?" Bai Yue asked. He, one of our myriad ancient race's 4 top puppet masters, Master Jia, was almost captured by the Jiaokai race a few days ago, and it was all thanks to fellow Taoist Han that he was able to escape unscathed, so of course I've heard of him, Xianxia replied as he stroked his beard. "What, does that Master Jia was sent to the border?" Kang Ying asked with a surprised look on his face. "Indeed, our race had an important matter to take care of, so we had no choice but to send Master Jia. We deployed a few guards to accompany him, but due to the invasion of the Jiao Kai race, all of them perished on the border. Are you too interested in the internal affairs of our myriad ancient race?" the elderly man asked with an amused smile. Bai Yue's expression changed upon hearing this, and he forced a smile onto his own face as he replied, "I wouldn't dare to pry into your race's internal affairs, fellow Taoist. It's just that Master Jia's proficiency in puppetry is quite extraordinary, making him an indispensable member of our 13 races, so I'm merely concerned for his safety." Indeed, we're both very happy to hear that Master Jia is now safe. It was quite apparent that Kang Ying was also feeling very uneasy. "Looks like I was overthinking things then. Seeing as this vast glacial badge has been activated by fellow Taoist Han, you wouldn't mind if I invited fellow Taoist Han back our race for a chat, would you? As for this place, we'll set up restrictions and deploy troops to put it into complete lockdown. Our myriad ancient race will deploy people soon after this to set up the relevant formation." Xianxia was speaking in a polite tone, but he gave the other 2 beings no opportunity to state any objections. Bai Yue and Kang Ying naturally weren't very pleased by this arrangement, but they had no choice but to bow to Xianxia's overwhelming might. The elderly man nodded with a content look before turning to Han Li with a smile as he asked, "Fellow Taoist Han, would you like to follow me to our race?" A wry smile appeared on Han Li's face upon hearing this. This was an invitation that was being extended by a being at the pinnacle of the body integration stage, so he certainly wouldn't dare to refuse it. As such, he could only respectfully reply, "If you don't mind my intrusion, I'd love to accompany you, senior." Xianxia could see the hesitation in Han Li's eyes, and he chuckled, "Haha, not to worry, fellow Taoist Han. Setting aside everything else, you are the one who saved Master Jia's life, and our myriad ancient race isn't one to repay kindness with animosity." Han Li could naturally only proclaim that those were never his thoughts. The rest of the process was quite simple. The armored warriors departed at Xianxia's behest to gather more of their comrades to this place, temporarily placing the area in a radius of several kilometers into a state of lockdown. As for this inn, it was naturally also isolated as the epicenter of the incident. Thus, a completely oblivious and stunned Xianxia was summoned to the room, and Han Li could only appraise the situation with a resigned smile. After that, Han Li and the elderly man departed from the inn, while the vast glacial badge remained there, with countless armored warriors guarding the place. Bai Yue and Kang Ying didn't remain in this place for much longer before taking their leave. However, Han Li and the elderly man didn't travel through the city via flight. Instead, there was a carriage being drawn by a pair of giant golden lion spirit beasts waiting on the side of the street beside the inn. The elderly man invited Han Li onto the carriage, and the giant lions rose up several feet above the ground before charging along at an incredible speed. Xianxia didn't have any intention to engage in an in-depth conversation with Han Li inside the carriage. He merely made some small talk before closing his eyes to meditate. Han Li's expression remained unchanged, but countless thoughts were racing through his mind as he considered just why he was being taken. The elderly man had assured him that he was only trying to repay Han Li for saving Jia Tianmo, but he certainly wasn't going to allow himself to be convinced by that. Even if he had saved Jia Tianmo, the favor had already been repaid by the sentient puppet that had been given to him. However, it appeared that they required his assistance to enter this so-called vast glacial realm, seeing as his blood essence had activated the vast glacial badge. In that case, he could perhaps use that as leverage to see if he could be granted access to use the super teleportation formation. Thus, he was still useful to the heavenly cloud races, so they definitely wouldn't plot against him right away. With that in mind, he was feeling a lot more reassured. The beast-drawn carriage that he was currently riding in was significantly faster than the other carriages he'd ridden in before, and it didn't take long for the carriage to reach the 8-cloud mountains. Hanli cast his gaze out the window at the 8 massive mountains in the distance, and a peculiar look flashed through his eyes. Was this Xianxia taking him back to his cave abode? A short while later, just as the beast-drawn carriage was approaching one of the 8 mountains, it suddenly changed directions and skirted around the mountain, flying toward the area behind it instead. Hanli was a little surprised by this, but after the beast-drawn carriage traveled around the mountain, he discovered that there was a small fortress that was several kilometers in size beyond the mountain. The fortress wasn't very large, but there were 7 or 8 layers of city walls around it. Each successive layer of the city walls was taller than the previous one as they approached the fortress, and just the outermost wall was already over 1,000 feet tall, while the innermost wall appeared to be close to 10,000 feet in height. From a distance, it appeared to be a fortress, but it was probably more accurate to call it a giant tower. Through the use of his bright-sight spirit eyes, Hanli could clearly see that there were silvery white statues situated atop the city walls as intervals of just over 1,000 feet. These statues all differed in appearance, with some being carved to resemble beasts, while others were more humanoid in shape. The largest of these statues were over 1,000 feet tall, and even the smallest were 700 to 800 feet tall. All of them were completely stationary, but there was an indescribable menacing aura emanating from their bodies. There were also rows of azure-armored guards wielding long halberds standing atop the city walls. All of them were patrolling the walls in a uniform manner, yet none of them were actually living creatures. They were all humanoid puppets. There was a tall pillar situated on each of the 4 corners of the fortress, and these pillars were respectively yellow, blue, red, and green in color. All of them were quite translucent, and they reached all the way up into the clouds. There were countless large runes flashing over their surfaces, giving them an extremely mysterious and eye-catching appearance. Just as Hanli was taking in the scenes before his eyes with a hint of awe in his heart, the beast-drawn carriage flew into the air above the fortress, then descended before a strange green hall that was situated at the center of the fortress. After disembarking from the carriage, Hanli glanced up at the hall to find a plaque that was several tens of feet long hanging from it. The words "Sentient Hall" were inscribed on the plaque in large golden letters, and Hanli immediately thought of his own sentient puppet. Could it be that this hall was somehow related to sentient puppets, or was this just a pure coincidence? Just as these thoughts were running through Hanli's mind, Xianxia chuckled. "Please come in, fellow Taoist. This is an important place to our myriad ancient race, and very rarely will we ever invite outsiders into it." "Thank you for giving me this honor, Senior," Hanli replied with a respectful bow. In the face of this immensely powerful being, Hanli didn't dare to show any disrespect, as nothing could come from a show of dissent. A hint of a smile appeared on Xianxia's face, and he waved a hand before walking on ahead. There was a white-robed guard standing on either side of the palace gates, and he remained completely expressionless as the elderly man strode toward the gates, as if he couldn't even see anything. Hanli was rather perplexed by this, and he took an extra glance at the guard, following which his expression abruptly changed slightly. "Looks like you figured it out, fellow Taoist Han. Those 2 guards are a pair of sentient puppets, both of which are 9th-tier upper race beings, and they can guard this palace day and night. Aside from a few special people who can take people into the palace, they'd everyone else who approached the palace without any hesitation," the elderly man explained without even turning his head. Hanli drew a sharp breath as he turned to the 2 white-robed puppets with a hint of awe in his eyes. These 2 puppets were equivalent in power to beings at the pinnacle of the spatial tempering stage. If a normal cultivator were to have these 2 puppets in accompaniment, they'd essentially be invincible below the body integration stage. It was a massive waste to be using such puppets to guard a hall like this. Hanli clicked his tongue with wonder internally as he glanced at the 2 expressionlessly puppets one final time. At this point, Xianxia had already made his way into the hall, so he could only follow him in through the gate. The exterior of this sentient hall appeared to be quite out of the ordinary, but the interior was actually quite simple. Aside from the main hall, there were only 2 side halls, one on the left and one on the right. Within the main hall, there were no other eye-catching features aside from several dozens of thick metal pillars. Xianxia strode directly over to the 2 rows of chairs situated at the center of the hall, before sitting down in the main seat. "Take a seat, fellow Taoist Han. The vast glacial badge is quite an important item, so I've already invited the other two elders of our race to gather here. The three of us are responsible for making all of the decisions in the myriad ancient race here in Cloud City, Xianxia said with a smile. I see. Looks like this vast glacial badge is far more significant an item than I'd expected, Han Li replied with a nod. He hadn't seen Xianxia do anything out of the ordinary on the way here, but he'd somehow already notified the other two elders. This only further accentuated the gap between spatial tempering stage and body integration stage beings. You're not from the Thunder Continent, are you, fellow Taoist? Xianxia suddenly asked. Han Li's heart stirred upon hearing this, but he then immediately relaxed as he nodded and truthfully replied, Indeed, I come from another continent. Has fellow Taoist Jia already disclosed my intention to use the super teleportation formation to you, senior? Master Jia did indeed mention this to me, and on top of that, there's no way that you wouldn't recognize the vast glacial badge and activate it without a second thought if you were from the Thunder Continent, Xianxia chuckled. Is the vast glacial badge supposed to be extremely renowned? I haven't seen any records of it anywhere. Would you be able to enlighten me, senior? Han Li asked with a wry smile. He didn't blame Jia Tianmu in the slightest for informing Xianxia of his intention to use the super teleportation formation. Instead, he would have found it quite strange if he hadn't done so. It's no surprise that there are no records of the vast glacial badge. It's quite a renowned object on our Thunder Continent, but it can't be used by any single being. Without the power of an entire race acting as support, even if one were to obtain the vast glacial badge, it would be impossible for them to enter the vast glacial realm. However, many beings of the upper race have heard about this badge, the elderly man explained with a smile. Using the badge requires the power of an entire race. This vast glacial realm must be quite an extraordinary place, Han Li mused as he stroked his chin. It's not just extraordinary. Some of the things that can be obtained from the vast glacial realm could even determine the fate of an entire race. Of course, such monumental treasures are exceedingly rare, even in the vast glacial realm. The main aspects about the realm that make it very attractive are that the richness of the world's origin chi there is over 10 times that of our spirit realm, and there are also many spirit medicines and spirit fruits there that were extremely difficult to find in the spirit realm. The elderly man explained with a smile. How can there be a place with such rich spiritual chi? An incredulous look appeared on Han Li's face upon hearing this. What kind of place do you think this vast glacial realm is, fellow Taoist? A spatial rift or a small subsidiary realm to the spirit realm? Xianxia chuckled as he stroked his beard. Please enlighten me, senior, Han Li replied in a respectful voice. The elderly man's smile faded, and he paused for a moment before continuing. This has not been completely confirmed, but we are almost entirely sure that the vast glacial realm is a damaged subsidiary space to the true immortal realm. A subsidiary space to the true immortal realm. Even with Han Li's steadfast nature, he couldn't help but be stunned by this revelation. Indeed, it should be a now-defunct space in the true immortal realm. Those who have entered this space in the past have found cave abodes and even remains that are suspected to have once belonged to immortals. However, no one has ever seen a living immortal in there, Xianxia confirmed with a nod. Han Li was left speechless as he sat on his chair with a blank expression on his face. There's no need to be so shocked, fellow Taoist. At present, this is only mere speculation. Among the cave abodes, remains and treasures discovered within the vast glacial realm, we've yet to discover anything that's actually useful, so it's not like anyone can just go in and come back out with extraordinary treasures that defy the natural order. Even the spirit medicines and spirit fruits I mentioned are mostly hidden in obscure locations that require extensive efforts to find, the elderly man said with a smile. All of a sudden, a clear voice sounded from outside the hall. In summary, there are many rare and precious items to be found in the vast glacial realm, but what you find in there will be down to your luck. Immediately thereafter, a streak of white light hurtled in through the gate, and the light faded to reveal a middle-aged man in a set of brocade robes. He had a pale face with a pair of thin and long eyes, as well as a distinctive hook nose. You sure got here quite quickly, Elder Ma. I had thought that Brother Huang would get here before you. Xianxia greeted the middle-aged man with a warm smile. It was quite obvious that this was another body integration stage elder of the myriad ancient race. Han Li hurriedly rose to his feet to extend a respectful salute. Elder Huang has recently been refining a batch of pills, and even if he received the news before me, it'd most likely take a while for him to get here. Is the fellow Taoist the one who activated the vast glacial badge? The middle-aged man asked as he turned an indifferent gaze toward Han Li. Indeed, senior. Han Li could only reply in a truthful manner. Seventh-tier upper race, not bad. Your magic power seems to be over twice as abundant as beings of the same cultivation base, and even upper race beings of the 8th or ninth tiers won't want to face you in battle. For some reason, this elder Ma decided to disclose his observations surrounding Han Li's cultivation base. Letter 1D627, letter 1D4C7, letter 212F, letter 1D452, letter 1D4CC, letter 1D452, letter 1D4B8, letter 2134, letter 1D4C2. Han Li was quite stunned that the elderly man was able to glean so much from a single cursory glance, but his expression remained quite polite and respectful as he explained. I have some special cultivation arts, so my magic power is indeed slightly more abundant than normal. Not just slightly more abundant. If a being of a higher cultivation base were to engage you in battle, thinking that they'd enjoy an easy victory, you'd most likely be able to turn the tables on them with ease. Your spiritual sense seems to be completely out of place in an upper race being as well. Golden light flashed past the middle-aged man's face as he unleashed some kind of secret technique, and a hint of surprise appeared in his eyes as he gleaned Han Li's immensely powerful spiritual sense. Han Li's calm facade finally cracked a little upon hearing this, as a hint of astonishment crept onto his face. All right, Elder Ma, you can stop flaunting your divine inspection technique now. It isn't really all that strange that fellow Taoist Han is far more powerful than beings of the same cultivation base. After all, he slew several such beings with ease while saving Master Jia, so it would be foolish to regard him as a normal upper race being. The elderly man was surprised in the slightest by Elder Ma's findings. I see. Forgive me for my impudence, fellow Taoist. Please take a seat. The middle-aged man chuckled before sitting down beside Xianxia. And Li finally managed to recompose himself, before also sitting down with a wry smile on his face. I heard on my way here that the two of you were discussing matters surrounding the vast glacial realm, and it sounded to me like you don't know much about it, fellow Taoist Han. What's the point in speaking in such a roundabout manner, Brother Qian? Just lay out the information in the most straightforward manner possible, Elder Ma urged, seemingly with a hint of displeasure in his voice. Qian splayed his hands open upon hearing this, and a slightly resigned look appeared on his face as he replied, I was just about to do that, but your arrival cut me off. Haha, now that you mention it, my entrance was indeed rather abrupt, the middle-aged man chuckled. Seeing as you're here, why don't you tell fellow Taoist Han about the vast glacial realm yourself, Brother Ma? After all, you once entered the realm in person, so you're far more qualified to talk about it than I am, Qian suggested. What's there to be said? I had very ordinary luck back when I entered the vast glacial realm, and I didn't obtain any extraordinary treasures or medicines. All of the races hold the vast glacial realm in such high regard mostly because of the abundant spiritual qi in there. They want to use the realm as a place where beings who had been stuck at their bottlenecks for extended periods of time could finally make their breakthroughs. If it weren't for the fact that I had entered the realm once, I wouldn't have achieved my current cultivation base. The middle-aged man shook his head with a slightly peculiar look on his face. You used the spiritual qi in there to break through a bottleneck. Han Li was quite surprised to hear this. Indeed, at the time, the spirit medicines that could be obtained in there were only a secondary objective for me. I only re-emerged with some very ordinary spirit medicines, so I obtained next to nothing from my trip there. I did hear that some others obtained some extremely rare tool refinement materials and used them to craft several sentient treasures. Elder Ma sighed in a forlorn manner. Haha, you should learn to be happy with what you have. Countless beings among our 13 races were extremely envious of you back when you were selected to enter the vast glacial realm. At the very least, I've never received such an opportunity, the elderly man chuckled. If I were as supremely talented as you and managed to break through the holy race bottleneck in just over 1,000 years, then I naturally wouldn't have had to enter the vast glacial realm. As you're well aware, that place is not a peaceful realm, Elder Ma replied in an indifferent voice. That's true. Several hundred vast glacial badges appear on the Thunder continent on each occasion, and how many beings can be teleported into the realm with each badge is dependent on the capabilities of the teleportation formation setup. Our myriad ancient race has always been responsible for setting up the teleportation formations for our heavenly cloud race, but teleporting around a dozen or so beings into the realm per badge is the extent of our capabilities. However, I've heard of some races that are extremely proficient in teleportation formation that can teleport over 30 beings into the realm per badge. It's a pity that we can't get our hands on their teleportation formation blueprints. Otherwise, we'd also be able to send more people into the vast glacial realm. With so many races clamoring to send their beings into the vast glacial realm, it always becomes a very chaotic place. The elderly man mused with furrowed brows. What makes things even worse is that each badge teleports beings to a random location. If a group of beings were to be teleported into the same area as beings from an enemy race, then a battle would be inevitable. Everyone knows that there will at least be an additional 30% chance of breaking through a bottleneck in there, so no race would allow so many high-grade beings to appear in their enemy races. Elder Ma seemed to be musing absent-mindedly to himself, but also explaining things for Han Li to hear. Han Li's eyes flashed slightly upon hearing this. Not only that, but there have been countless instances of beings killing others in their over-treasures and spirit medicines. However, the most perilous aspect of the vast glacial realm is actually the realm itself. No one had seen a living immortal in there, but there are some incredibly powerful ancient beasts in there, each and every one of which is far too powerful for any of the beings that venture into the realm to face. If you encounter a more mild-tempered one, you could simply give it a wide berth and go around it without much trouble. However, if you encounter a violent one that actively attacks even without being provoked, then you'll have to pray that you survive that ordeal somehow. On top of that, there are many terrifying restrictions in the vast glacial realm that are suspected to have been left behind by immortals. If you stumble into one of those, then you're most likely as good as dead as well. Hence, it's quite often the case that less than half the number of people that enter the realm actually return, Xianxia added. Han Li's expression darkened involuntarily upon hearing this. After a lengthy silence, he asked, Senior Qian, Senior Ma, may I ask when and how the vast glacial realm was discovered? You've stumped us there. No one knows exactly when the vast glacial realm appeared, but it had most likely been discovered by the races that resided here during ancient times. It's said that an extremely important battle between the races had broken out at the time, and profound heavenly treasures had been used during the battle. The combined powers of several profound heavenly treasures shattered space at the time, thereby opening up a passageway to the vast glacial realm. As for how the vast glacial badges appeared, we really have no clue. It was as if the badges appeared as soon as the vast glacial realm appeared. In the beginning, there were over 1,000 vast glacial badges, but after so many years, most of them have been destroyed, the elderly man replied. The method of entering and exiting the vast glacial realm is also quite unique. When entering the realm, the badge is required, but when leaving the realm, the badges have to be left in there before one can depart. After over 10,000 years, the vast glacial realm will open up once again, and the badges will somehow reappear all over the Thunder Continent. On top of that, the badges can't teleport beings at or above the holy race, so none of the elders of the 13 races can access the realm. Otherwise, things wouldn't be so troublesome. By the way, I'm really curious about how you managed to obtain this vast glacial badge, fellow Taoist Han. Elder Ma turned to Han Li in an expressionless manner as he spoke. Han Li's heart jolted upon seeing Elder Ma's shift in demeanor, but he remained calm as he replied. I actually received this vast glacial badge from a certain fellow Taoist Yuan of your myriad ancient race. At the time, the city we were situated in had been surrounded by the Jiao Kai race, so fellow Taoist Yuan gave a jade box to each of his companions, including myself, so we could take them away from the city. He asked us to give the boxes to any one of the 13 heavenly cloud races, and to destroy them if we found ourselves unable to get away from our Jiao Kai race pursuers. I was quite curious about what was in the box, so I decided to open it, and I unwittingly activated this badge in the process. Someone with a Yuan surname. In that case, it has to be the one responsible for Green Light City. Rather than being surprised to hear this, Qian merely nodded in a calm manner. It appeared that he'd already guessed the origin of this badge. Han Li's heart stirred upon seeing this. At this moment, the middle-aged man's expression darkened, and he said, We haven't received any news of other vast glacial badges being gathered by the other races in Cloud City, so that means all of the other badges must have fallen into the hands of the Jiao Kai race. That's most likely the case. Apparently, they have 2 holy race beings leading their army, and they've even deployed a fortress-level battle arc, so it's already extremely fortunate that fellow Taoist Han was able to bring just a single badge back to us, Qian sighed. In that case, things will be quite troublesome for us. Our 13 races combined only have 17 or 18 badges. That's much less than usual. In contrast, the number of Jiao Kai beings that will enter the vast glacial realm will increase significantly, Elder Ma said with a grim expression. There's nothing we can do about that. We've gathered all of the vast glacial badges we could, and when we received news that 5 more badges had been discovered, we thought that we'd stumbled upon a figurative gold mine. However, the Jiaokai race suddenly attacked at this crucial juncture before we could transport the 5 badges to Cloud City, which has led to them being lost. Xianxia sighed as he narrowed his eyes slightly. Elder Ma nodded before suddenly turning to Han Li as he said in an implacable tone, "In that case, there's no point in wasting time with words. Fellow Taoist Han, you'll have to accompany our myriad ancient race nominees into the vast glacial realm on this occasion." "In that case, it looks like I have no choice but to comply," Han Li said in an indifferent manner. "Haha, there's no need to be so depressed, fellow Taoist Han. There are some perils in the vast glacial realm, but most people would do anything for a chance to enter it. Many people will envy you for the opportunity to enter the realm," Xianxia chuckled. "My cultivation base hasn't reached a bottleneck yet, so entering the realm won't benefit me much. Instead, there's a good chance that I'll be dying in there. The risk and reward comparison simply isn't worth it, so if there's any possibility that I can be exempt from entering the realm, I would definitely pass up this opportunity." Han Li shook his head in a gloomy manner. Xianxia and Elder Ma exchanged a glance upon hearing this, and the former said in a slow voice, "A vast glacial badge has been activated. Only the one who has activated it can take others to the void glacial realm with them. The future of our 13 races hinges on this, so you must enter the realm. That's non-negotiable. You've carried the badge to us, so our myriad ancient race should be grateful to you. But you've activated the badge and we've given you the opportunity to enter the vast glacial realm, so we've repaid you for your efforts. However, seeing as you're being forced into the vast glacial realm against your will, you can state any condition that you may have, and we'll do our best to satisfy you." Han Li's heart abruptly jolted upon hearing this, and he immediately said, "I'm sure you know what request I have already. After returning from the vast glacial realm, I'd like to use your super teleportation formation." "You want to use the teleportation formation. If it's only once, then we should be able to arrange that. However, teleportation using that formation requires a vast expenditure of top-grade spirit stones, and you'll have to issue the spirit stones yourself. There's no way that we'll supply them for you. Furthermore, our race cannot make executive decisions on the teleportation formation, so we have to discuss this matter with the other few races. Perhaps they may also have some conditions that you must satisfy before they'll allow you to use the formation," Xianxia replied in a calm manner. "As long as I can use the teleportation formation, I'll naturally supply the spirit stones required. As for any other conditions that may be raised, as long as they're not conditions that are completely outside of my realm of capability, I can accept them," Han Li said with an elated look on his face. Don't be so quick to jump at this opportunity, fellow Taoist Han. Activating the super teleportation formation even just once requires so many top-grade spirit stones that even some holy race beings wouldn't be able to afford it. You may have some wealth, but it will still most likely be very difficult for you to gather enough top-grade spirit stones to use the formation. With your cultivation base, you'll be greatly valued even if you were to stay in our myriad ancient race, so why insist on traveling to other continents? I suggest you take this opportunity to change to another condition and request for some tangible benefits like pills or treasures instead. That would be ideal for both sides," Elder Ma proposed. Han Li's expression faltered upon hearing this, but he shook his head after a brief silence and said, "Thank you for your kind offer, Senior, but I've already made up my mind." As opposed to being enraged by Han Li's refusal, Elder Ma only nodded indifferently and spoke no further on this matter. "By the way, when will the vast glacial realm open up? I want to make some preparations beforehand, so learning the amount of time I have left will be quite beneficial," Han Li suddenly asked. "We're not sure of the exact opening date either, but according to past experience, it'll be somewhere between several years to a century from now," Xianxia replied with a smile. "A century," Han Li abruptly exclaimed upon hearing this. "For cultivators like us, a century passes in the mere blink of an eye. Surely there's no need to be so alarmed, fellow Taoist Han," the middle-aged man said as he raised an eyebrow. "My apologies, it was just surprised that it would take so long," Han Li replied with a wry smile. "You're living in the inn from before, right? That place has been placed into lockdown, and you won't be leaving Cloud City anytime soon, so why don't you move to the 8 Cloud Mountains as well, fellow Taoist Han? I'll get someone to organize a free cave abode for you so you can cultivate in peace while awaiting the opening of the vast glacial realm," Xianxia said. Han Li was a little taken aback by this offer, but after quickly weighing up his options, he nodded in agreement. After that, Xianxia and Elder Ma asked some casual questions about Han Li's origins, to which Han Li gave a few intentionally ambiguous responses. It was quite clear that Han Li didn't want to disclose too much information about himself, and the two myriad ancient race elders didn't insist on prying either. Not long after that, the third elder of the myriad ancient race finally arrived. This was a tall and broad, heavily bearded man, and he only took a glance at Han Li and delivered some absent-minded praise before hurrying away, citing the excuse that he had a half-refined batch of spirit pills in his cauldron that he had to attend to. Xianxia and Elder Ma could only exchange a resigned smile upon seeing this. They seemed to have already become accustomed to this Elder Huang's personality. Thus, after receiving a myriad distance talisman from Elder Ma, Han Li finally stood up to leave. Prior to his departure, Xianxia told him that he would discuss with the other races about the teleportation formation and organize a cave abode for him within 3 days. Hence, he could move into the 8 Cloud Mountains after that. Han Li naturally thanked the elderly man for his kindness, then left the hall and departed from the myriad ancient race's fortress on the beast-drawn carriage outside. At this moment, both Xianxia and Elder Ma were sitting in silence within the hall, seemingly in deep thought. "What do you think? Could he be a spy from the Jiao Kai race?" Xianxia asked. "There's no way that he's a spy. Expending a vast glacial badge just to plant a spy in our heavenly cloud races is far too heavy a price to pay. Besides, he also saved Master Jia and killed several Jiao Kai beings of the same cultivation base as himself. No matter how you look at it, the Jiao Kai race would have to be downright insane to sacrifice so much just to plant a spy. On top of that, even if he were to become a guest member of one of our 13 races, he wouldn't be able to obtain any of our confidential secrets anyway, so what would be the point?" Elder Ma immediately shook his head in response. "My thoughts exactly. In that case, we won't have to use a soul search technique to determine his origins. Otherwise, it could prove to be detrimental to us if we were to draw resentment from him." Xianxia agreed with a nod. "On top of that, he possesses extremely powerful combat prowess that's no less potent than beings at the pinnacle of the spatial tempering stage, so it would be greatly beneficial to our race if he could become a guest member of ours, so we should do our best to recruit him rather than get on his bad side," Elder Ma added. "But he seems to be quite intent on leaving the Thunder Continent," Xianxia countered with furrowed brows. It's not that easy to gather so many top-grade spirit stones. Who knows how long it'll take for him to save up the spirit stones required. During this process, we'll just have to expend some effort to try and convince him to stay. Of course, if he still insists on leaving in the end, then there's no need for us to play the villains and force him to stay. Our race certainly isn't short of beings at the pinnacle of the spatial tempering stage, so there's no need to risk ruining our reputation for him," Elder Ma mused. Letter 1D4EF, letter 1D667, letter 1D4E, letter 1D4E, letter 1D498, letter 1D4E, letter 1D486, letter 1D4EC, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4AT. Following a brief pause, Xianxia nodded and said, "Seeing as you've already made up your mind, I have no objections. Let's talk about the news we received about the Jiao Kai race. This invasion from the Jiao Kai race is only a far larger scale than past invasions. Setting aside everything else, just the number of holy race beings they've deployed is." Elder Ma changed the subject and moved on to the Jiao Kai race invasion thereafter. Meanwhile, Han Li didn't go too far away from the 8 Cloud Mountains before disembarking from the carriage on a relatively secluded street, then found an inn to live in on a temporary basis. The inn was quite ordinary in appearance and closely resembled a building that one would see in the human race. After setting up a restriction in his room, Han Li sat down in a cross-legged manner on his bed, then began to carefully think back through his conversation with the elders of the myriad ancient race, trying to see if there were alarming aspects that he should take note of. After contemplating for a long while, he finally exhaled as his expression gradually relaxed. From what he could recall, the elders didn't seem to be plotting against him in any way, and his only concern was that the vast glacial realm could be quite dangerous. However, seeing as there were no beings at or above the body integration stage that could enter the realm, he didn't have much to fear. As long as he wasn't too greedy or ambitious and stumbled around everywhere in search of spirit medicines and treasures, he should be quite safe. He'd just have to find an obscure location to hide in, and whether then storm, then return following the conclusion of the ordeal. He had already thought through all this back in the sentient hall, which was why he'd agreed to the conditions made by the elders without any hesitation. However, it did indeed come as quite a surprise to him that he'd have to wait for so long before the vast glacial realm were to open up. If he really did have to wait for a century, then he should be able to use his spirit pills to cultivate to the pinnacle of the early spatial tempering stage. After that, he could try and use the astonishingly abundant spiritual chi in the vast glacial realm to break through to the mid-spatial tempering stage. This was only possible as he could use the liquid produced by the mysterious vial to essentially infinitely refine the extremely rare rising dragon pills. Otherwise, for a normal cultivator, it would take at least 500 to 600 years to cultivate to the pinnacle of the early spatial tempering stage. After reaching the spatial tempering stage, further advancements required far more spiritual power to be gathered and cultivated than for progression in the deity transformation stage. On top of that, Han Li had chosen the path of simultaneous cultivation, which was far more difficult than just normal cultivation. With that in mind, Han Li's expression suddenly stirred slightly, and he flipped his hand over to produce a white jade box that also had crimson talismans plastered to its surface. This was none other than the other jade box given to him by the big-headed being. Han Li knew that if he were to bring out this item, he'd definitely be able to secure greater benefits from the elders of the myriad ancient race. At the very least, he'd be able to secure another sentient puppet for himself. However, he made no mention of this in the sentient hall as a safety precaution. Regardless of whether having an extra vast glacial badge would benefit him in any way after entering the vast glacial realm, he'd rather keep it as backup than exchange it for any benefits. Having made up his mind, white light flashed from Han Li's hand, and the jade box disappeared. After that, he sat down on the bed and entered a meditative state. For 3 consecutive days, Han Li stayed in the room without leaving even once. On this day, just as he was cultivating with golden light shimmering from his entire body, he suddenly opened his eyes and flipped his hand over to produce the myriad distance talisman that Qian Jizzi had given to him. On the white surface of the talisman, a line of small text had appeared. After reading the message on the talisman, Han Li stowed it away expressionlessly before making his way out of the room. Half a day later, he found himself within a certain cave abode on the Dream Cloud Mountain of the 8 Cloud Mountains, and he was inspecting the cave abode with a pleased look on his face. The abundance of spiritual chi in this cave abode was not inferior in the slightest compared to Jia Tianmu's cave abode on the iridescent Cloud Mountain. Furthermore, the cave abode came complete with a pill refinement chamber, tool refinement chamber, medicine garden, as well as a variety of other facilities. There were even some commonly used spirit medicines that had been planted in the medicine garden, and he was very satisfied with his new home. However, Han Li didn't immediately begin cultivating. Instead, he used his spiritual sense to scan through every single nook and cranny of the cave abode, then set up a dozen or so restrictions of different sizes. Having done all that, even a body integration stage being wouldn't be able to force their way into his cave abode in a short time. After that, he transferred some of the spirit medicines and spirit herbs that he required into the medicine garden, before busying himself with pill refinement. His plan was to refine a large number of rising dragon pills, most of which would be reserved for his own consumption, while the rest would be taken to the markets to be exchanged for top-grade spirit stones. Letter 1D487, letter 1D493, letter 1D65A, letter 1D486, letter 1D500, letter 1D4E, letter 1D4EC, letter 1D664, letter 1D662. After all, both his sentient puppet and the super teleportation formation required an incredible amount of spirit stones to function, and he wouldn't be able to exchange for enough of them even through selling all of his myriad-year spirit medicines. Furthermore, selling too many myriad-year spirit medicines would attract a lot of attention, so it was better to sell rising dragon pills instead. With the immense power of these pills, he was sure that the upper race beings of Cloud City would be willing to pay astronomical prices for them. Of course, he wasn't going to sell too many of them, and he had to conceal his own identity in the process. If he were to only sell the pills on 2 or 3 occasions, that shouldn't be enough to attract the attention of the holy race beings in the city. If he still couldn't gather enough top-grade spirit stones through doing that, then he'd have to consider selling his golden lightning bamboo. Given how rare golden lightning bamboo was in the spirit realm, just one plant would most definitely be enough to get him sufficient top-grade spirit stones. Han Li had already devised a plan to gather enough top-grade spirit stones while refining his rising dragon pills, and Qian Jizzi, most likely would have never imagined that Han Li would be capable of doing something that he thought to be impossible in such a short time. This was only a minor inconvenience to Han Li, rather than the insurmountable roadblock that Qian Jizzi had assumed that this would be. As Qian Jizzi was leading him to his new cave abode, the former disclosed to him that he had secured the agreement of the other races for him to use the teleportation formation. As for conditions, they didn't state some, but they weren't very stringent. Most of them merely asked for a usage fee from him. The only slightly troublesome condition was raised by the stone cocoon race. They asked him to search for a tool refinement material that could only be found in the vast glacial realm. They had a map on which the place where this material could be found had been annotated, and all he had to do was act as the errand boy of the stone cocoon race after entering the vast glacial realm. This condition was naturally rather dangerous to him, but this material seemed to be extremely important to the stone cocoon race, as evidenced by the fact that they stipulated this condition to be non-negotiable. Thus, Han Li agreed to it as well after a brief contemplation. If he only had to head to a designated location to secure an ingredient, then this was a risk that wasn't too big for him to take. Hence, Han Li had arrived at an official agreement with the heavenly cloud races. As soon as he returned from the vast glacial realm, he'd be granted a one-time usage pass of the super teleportation formation. After that, Han Li stayed in his cave abode for more than an entire year. During this time, he refined his pills while taking some rising dragon pills to cultivate his provenance true devil arts. Even though this wasn't a very long time, his provenance true devil projection was looking slightly more substantial than it did over a year ago, which was a further testament to just how potent rising dragon pills were. However, what was rather surprising to Han Li was that the crystal woman by the name of Xianxia hadn't contacted using the myriad distance talisman he'd left her during this time. It was as if she'd completely forgotten about him. Han Li was rather perplexed, but he didn't go to find her. On this day, Han Li finally emerged from his cave abode, and after taking a cursory glance around him, he flew down the mountain as a streak of azure light. Coincidentally, or by design, there just so happened to be another streak of white light flying down from the summit of the mountain at the same time, and the streak of light reached the foot of the mountain along with Han Li almost in unison. The white and azure lights faded, revealing Han Li and a bald man. The bald man had a set of sinister facial features, and his skin was of a grayish-white color. The two of them both looked at one another with a hint of surprise in their eyes. "I am Tai Jian of the stone cocoon race. You look rather unfamiliar, fellow Taoist. Did you only move in recently?" The man was a little menacing to behold, but he spoke in quite a polite voice. Han Li swept his spiritual sense toward the man to find that he was a being at the pinnacle of the spatial tempering stage, and his heart jolted slightly with shock, but he merely smiled as he replied, "My surname is Han, and I did indeed only move in recently." "Oh, so it's fellow Taoist Han. I heard that last year an outsider activated a vast glacial badge, and he also had the Han surname. Could you be that outsider, fellow Taoist Han?" The man immediately guessed Han Li's identity after hearing his surname. A hint of surprise flashed through Han Li's eyes, but he smiled as he replied, "I was indeed the one activated the vast glacial badge a year ago. I didn't think that I would be so renowned in these parts." "Haha, you're the first outsider to have activated a vast glacial badge in our heavenly cloud races, so you're naturally quite well known by everyone. Are you going out now, because you also heard about the precious auction items being offered in the Four Races auction?" Four Races auction. Han Li drew a complete blank upon hearing this. "Oh, do you not know about this, fellow Taoist Han? Then again, that's no surprise, seeing as you've only just recently come to our Cloud City. The Four Races auction is something that's held by 4 of our 13 races once every decade to try and increase the popularity of Cloud City. All of the auction items are precious treasures that aren't normally sold during auctions, so the event always attracts many high-grade beings to Cloud City. On this occasion, our 13 races have been forced onto the back foot by the invasion of the Jiao Kai race, so the auction items are even more prestigious than usual in order to boost morale. Among the auction items, there are even going to be myriad wonder pills being sold. Those pills are ideal for helping spatial tempering cultivators like us break through bottlenecks. Only the top pill refinement masters of the crystal race are capable of refining those pills, and they've never appeared in the past editions of the auction," Tai Jian explained. Han Li's heart stirred upon hearing this. "Myriad wonder pill, eh? I've also heard of these pills before. Back when he was at Green Light City, those foreign spatial tempering stage beings had mentioned this pill, and they seemed to be even more valuable than sentient puppets. If they really were useful for spatial tempering cultivators, then it would naturally be very beneficial to him if he could obtain the pill or its refinement method. With that in mind, Han Li was quite intrigued as he said, "It wouldn't be right for me to miss such an auspicious occasion. In that case, why don't we go together, fellow Taoist? Truth be told, I'll very likely be part of the group of beings selected to enter the vast glacial realm on this occasion. Perhaps we'll be in the same group together. If that happens, I'll have to trouble you to look out for me," the bald man chuckled. "Surely you jest, fellow Taoist. You're a ninth-tier upper race being, so your cultivation base far outstrips mine. However, I really am rather unfamiliar with Cloud City, so I'll be counting on you to lead the way, Brother Tai," Han Li replied. Tai Jian merely smiled and didn't respond. Instead, he raised a hand to hail one of the beast-drawn carriages parked at the foot of the mountain, then invited Han Li onto the carriage first. Han Li accepted the invitation, climbing onto the carriage first, followed by Tai Jian, who then turned to the driver and instructed, "Take us to the Cloud Intent auction house." The driver gave an affirmative response before spurring the beast-drawn carriage into motion. Inside the carriage, Han Li made further inquiries about the Four Races auction, and only then did he learn that the auction had actually already been running for a few days, but the truly precious auction items that were of the highest caliber were being sold today. In order to obtain a myriad wonder pill, Tai Jian had even borrowed a large batch of spirit stones from his friends. Han Li heard from Tai Jian that there were going to be 2 sentient puppets from the myriad ancient race that were also going to be sold during the auction, and he was quite tempted by that prospect. After traveling for over 2 hours, the beast-drawn carriage changed directions and diverged onto a very wide street. The number of beast-drawn carriages on this street increased dramatically compared to elsewhere, and there were also many powerful cultivators there as well. In the end, the beast-drawn carriage came to an abrupt halt near the end of the street, where it was in the company of several tens of other beast-drawn carriages. Han Li and Tai Jian disembarked before looking around, and Han Li discovered that there was a massive square building up ahead that was close to 10,000 feet wide and over 1,000 feet tall. At the pinnacle of the building was a cylindrical altar, above which a yellow ring with a diameter of over 100 feet was hovering. The ring was constructed from an unknown material that was neither metallic nor wooden in nature, and it was slowly rotating while emitting a cold light that encompassed the entire hall down below. There were rows of armored warriors standing around the hall in a stationary manner, and all of them were actually powerful puppets. The hall had a total of 3 entrances, 1 large and 2 small, with over 20 blue-robed guards situated outside them. All of these guards were spatial tempering stage beings. At this moment, there weren't many people entering the hall through the largest main entrance. Instead, the 2 smaller entrances were being used quite frequently, presenting a lively and bustling scene to behold. Just as Han Li was assessing the situation, Tai Jian turned to him and asked, "Fellow Taoist Han, I have some things that I want to sell in the side hall to get some more spirit stones. Would you like to come with me?" "Is there a trade center in the side hall? Isn't this supposed to be an auction house?" Han Li was rather surprised to hear this. Everyone who's attending the auction needs to carry a large number of spirit stones with them. So many fellow Taoists like to sell off some of the precious materials they've gathered for spirit stones prior to the commencement of the auction. Hence, there will always be some time allotted before the auction for fellow Taoists to exchange items for spirit stones or try their luck and see if they can find something they'd like to purchase. If you end up not being able to sell your items to anyone, you can sell them directly to the auction house as well, but obviously at a slightly lower price than what they'd normally fetch. The good thing is that with 4 of the 13 races supporting the auction house, they'll have sufficient spirit stones to purchase anything, regardless of how rare it is. One of the side halls beside the main hall is dedicated to those looking to buy, while the other is for sellers looking to sell off items, Tai Jian explained. So we can purchase items in the side halls as well. Han Li was rather intrigued to hear this. "Are you interested in selling or buying, Brother Han? If so, I suggest you go look at what everyone's selling before you go and sell your own things. If you can trade something that you own for something that you need, that would be ideal for both parties," Tai Jian suggested. "That's a good idea, fellow Taoist. In that case, I'll go in and have a look," Han Li replied with a nod of approval. "All right, then I'll come with you. Perhaps you'll find some things that you need if you're lucky." A smile appeared on Tai Jian's face as he led Han Li directly toward the entrance of the side hall on the right. The blue-robed guards at the entrance merely glanced at Tai Jian and Han Li before allowing them into the side hall without asking any questions. The Four Races auction is only held to boost the popularity of Cloud City, so all upper race beings and above can attend as they please. As such, there's a great diversity in cultivation bases and status among the beings who attend the auction. It's also because of this that this auction attracts far more people per year than the other auctions held in Cloud City, Tai Jian explained with a smile as he strode into the side entrance alongside Han Li. All upper race beings or above can attend this auction. Can this auction house hold that many people? Han Li's brows furrowed with skepticism. It was no wonder that Han Li would have such doubts, seeing as the number of upper race beings in the Cloud City definitely numbered in the hundreds of thousands. No matter how he looked at it, this hall was definitely not large enough to house that many beings. You'll see for yourself soon, so there's no need for me to explain, Tai Jian replied with a mysterious smile. Han Li's expression changed slightly as he cast his gaze up ahead, and only then did he realize that he had been walking through this entrance for longer than he'd expected, yet still hadn't reached the side hall. Letter 1D41F, letter 1D5FF, letter 1D41E, letter 1D68E, letter 1D6A0, letter 1D41E. Letter 1D554, letter 1D560, letter 1D696. Wait, the shimmering white entrance up ahead had appeared quite close to them even in the very beginning, so why was it that after walking for a while, they didn't seem to have closed down the distance to the entrance at all? A hint of surprise appeared on Han Li's face as he murmured, "Spatial techniques are being used here." Haha, you finally noticed, fellow Taoist Han. This auction house itself is actually a super spatial treasure that possesses spatial abilities and can expand or shrink at will. The interior of the hall can house over 10 times as many beings as it appears to be able to from the outside, so it's more than equipped to handle the influx of auction attendees, Tai Jian chuckled. I see, no wonder the ring at the top of the building looks so peculiar. A contemplative look appeared on Han Li's face. Due to the auction house's spatial ability, the entrance has been elongated slightly, but it's still not all that long, so we should be able to emerge on the other side soon, Tai Jian said in a confident manner. Han Li merely nodded without offering a reply. Just as Tai Jian had proclaimed, after walking for a short while longer, the entrance up ahead suddenly drew closer to them, and they made their way through it to appear on a spacious plaza. The plaza was very lively and bustling, resembling a popular street market. There were a series of semi-spherical light barriers situated next to one another in tight rows on the plaza, and many cultivators were entering and exiting those light barriers. At the center of the plaza was a white jade stone platform, atop which an ordinary wooden table had been placed. There was a pair of azure-robed figures with delicate facial features handing out something to the foreign being standing in front of the table. Just as Han Li was inspecting his surroundings, Tai Jian suddenly cupped his fist in a salute as he said, "Let's part ways here, fellow Taoist Han. I have to find some buyers so I can sell off my treasures as quickly as possible, so I won't accompany you any longer." "Go ahead, fellow Taoist. I also want to do some exploring on my own as well," Han Li replied with a polite smile. "Farewell for now then, brother Han." Tai Jian nodded before hurrying away. Han Li looked on at Tai Jian's departing figure for a short while before casting his gaze toward the jade platform, then suddenly making his way toward it. Moments later, he had arrived close to the platform, and at this moment, a few more beings strode onto the platform. Han Li looked on from the side to find that these foreign beings were exchanging bags of high-grade spirit stones for small flags of different colors from the pair of azure-robed figures. Han Li's gaze followed one of those foreign beings to find that, after receiving a small flag, he made his way over to an empty spot near the edge of the plaza, then waved the small flag to conjure up a semi-spherical light barrier that concealed himself within. Han Li released his spiritual sense toward the light barrier, only for it to be kept at bay by a certain restriction. It was quite clear that these light barriers were specifically to be used for cultivators looking to trade on the plaza. With the light barriers set up, they wouldn't have to worry about other people gleaning their secrets. Han Li cast his gaze toward the surrounding area to find that these semi-spherical light barriers were everywhere, and further beyond the plaza that he was situated on, there were even a few smaller plazas that were also very busy. Han Li exhaled as he shook his head. For sellers looking to hand off their treasures to someone, finding a suitable buyer among so many beings was akin to finding a needle in a haystack, so he certainly wasn't going to waste too much time here. If he wanted to try and secure a myriad wonder pill for himself, then he had to gather a large sum of spirit stones prior to the commencement of the auction. With that in mind, Han Li began to slowly walk along the edge of the plaza. Most of the time, he would only have a look from the outside. He'd enter a light barrier or two occasionally, but he'd then quickly re-emerge from within. After 15 minutes, Han Li still hadn't accomplished anything, and his brows furrowed as he turned around in a decisive manner, retracing his steps to head back to the exit. Perhaps it was pure coincidence or by Han Li's design, but when he stepped into the exit again, he was the only one in there. As he walked along the passageway, he suddenly rustled a sleeve to produce a black veil, and it disintegrated into a cloud of faint black mist amid a dull thump. The black mist settled over Han Li, making his body quite blurry and indistinct. Almost immediately thereafter, light flashed within the black mist, and it surged around him before forming a glossy black robe that draped itself over his body. At this moment, Han Li emerged from the mist with his head lowered, and his aura had become extremely faint. When he raised his head again, he had already adopted a completely new set of facial features. In what seemed like the mere blink of an eye, Han Li had completely disguised himself. After that, Han Li emerged from the exit in an unhurried manner, passing by a few foreign beings who were walking in the opposite direction. The blue-robed guards outside merely glanced at Han Li before allowing him to depart. Thus, Han Li made his way into the other side hall and found himself on another large plaza, but the scenes within came as a slight surprise to him. There were also many beings gathered here, but in contrast with the other side hall where treasures were being sold, most of the people here were gathered on a small section of the plaza. There, a series of bluestone walls stood, and each of them was over 100 feet in height. There were silver characters flashing from the walls, and all of the foreign beings were gathered around them, looking on with rapt focus. Further on beyond the stone walls, there were a dozen or so jade pavilions with multiple levels, and all of these pavilions were interconnected with one another. The pavilions were all of a translucent snowy white in color, and their doors were wide open, but the entrances were concealed by layers of flashing white light. The pavilion at the center of the cluster of pavilions was crimson in color and enshrouded under a layer of faint azure smoke. Furthermore, there was an indistinct fragrant aroma emanating from it, as if it were some kind of ethereal, otherworldly object. The beings inspecting the stone walls would occasionally enter those jade pavilions, and some would re-emerge in high spirits, while others were left quite dejected. After assessing the situation, Han Li made his way over to one of the stone walls. Yet right at this moment, a slender figure standing before a nearby stone wall suddenly turned around and also headed toward the same wall that Han Li was walking toward. Han Li cast a reflexive glance toward the slender figure, and he abruptly shuddered as his expression changed drastically. This was a woman with a head of long black hair and a set of blue robes. Her facial features were exquisitely beautiful, yet her expression was quite cold, and she strode directly over to the other stone wall before inspecting it with her brows furrowed in concentration, completely oblivious to Han Li's reaction toward her. Han Li's footsteps drew to a halt as his face paled slightly. He stared intently at the blue-robed woman with an unblinking gaze and murmured in a voice that was only audible to himself, "How could it be her? That's impossible. Are there really people in this world who so closely resemble one another?" The intense scrutiny that the blue-robed woman was receiving from Han Li finally drew her attention, and their eyes met as she turned toward him. The woman initially faltered at the sight of Han Li staring blankly at her, but a hint of rage then quickly appeared on her face. She swept her spiritual sense toward him, and her heart jolted with shock as she discovered that she was unable to detect any spiritual chi fluctuations from his body. This was quite unsettling to her, and she immediately turned around. At this moment, Han Li finally managed to recompose himself, and his expression reverted back to normal as he stared at the woman in deep thought. This blue-robed woman was a memory in the bottom of his heart that he had been trying not to revisit, and as such, he was both astonished to see her, yet also hesitant about approaching her. She was Chen Kaiokian, the woman who had once expressed her love toward him countless years ago, and the memory of her voice and her smile filled Han Li's entire heart. This blue-robed woman was completely identical to Chen Kaiokian, who had already perished in the human world. Aside from her fact that her demeanor was quite cold, she was the spitting image of Chen Kaiokian, and it was as if she'd been resurrected. Back when Han Li had heard about her death, he'd remained quite calm and collected, but an indescribable sense of sorrow had welled up in his heart. It wasn't the type of grief that one would be struck by following the passing of a lover. Instead, it was simply a reminiscent sense of melancholy that any normal man would experience when hearing about the passing of a woman who had once loved them. However, there was no way that Chen Kai-okian could be resurrected, and there was certainly no chance that she would be reincarnated in the spirit realm. As such, regardless of how closely she resembled Chen Kai-okian, she had to be someone else. This string of thoughts rapidly flashed through Han Li's mind, and he finally managed to forcibly repress his slightly tumultuous emotions. Following a brief hesitation, he still proceeded with his original plan, making his way toward the same stone wall. The blue-robed woman didn't turn around, but she seemed to have an ability that allowed her to sense what was happening behind her, and her brows furrowed as she departed from her original spot. Thus, Han Li strode forward and stood directly on the spot where she had been standing just a moment ago. Even without turning around, Han Li could sense the vicious glare that the blue-robed woman had aimed at him, following which she hurried away to a stone wall that was slightly further away. It appeared that this woman had formed the opinion that he was some kind of perverted swine. Han Li chuckled internally before focusing his attention on the stone wall in front of him. As expected, the silver characters on the stone wall were all names of different types of materials and treasures, but strangely enough, none of the items had any prices listed next to them. They only had a number between 1 to 13 assigned to them. Han Li's heart stirred upon seeing this, and a thought occurred to him as he cast his gaze toward the distance. There just so happened to be 13 jade pavilions surrounding the crimson pavilion, and there was a shimmering golden number hovering above each of the pavilions. Letter 1D5F3, letter 1D69B, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D556, letter 1D568, letter 1D556, letter 1D5F0, letter 1D5FC, letter 1D55E. As such, it wasn't difficult to deduce what those numbers assigned to the materials meant. He wasn't in any hurry, so he carefully scanned his gaze throughout the entire stone wall, then headed toward the next one. Han Li was able to glean the contents of an entire stone wall virtually in the blink of an eye, yet even after looking through most of the stone walls present, he remained completely expressionless as if he hadn't found anything that caught his eye. Right at this moment, a rumbling boom rang out from the crimson pavilion at the very center, following which a thunderous roar of rage erupted from within. "What? You're saying this is fake, eccentric song? That's impossible. I went a great lengths to obtain this treasure, and I was almost killed by a bunch of golden-winged giants in the process. Quit yelling. I've made my final appraisal, and I can tell you with certainty that this thing is fake. You can leave now, fellow Taoist Duan," a sharp voice replied from within the pavilion. "I was bedridden for 7 years after obtaining this item, yet you're telling me it's fake. The person who supplied me with the information better pray that they don't bump into me again. Otherwise, I'll twist his head off." Another resounding roar of rage rang out, and this time, a hint of spiritual power had been injected into the voice, making it clearly audible to virtually everyone outside. All of a sudden, red light flashed from the surface of the crimson pavilion, following which a massive figure that was around 30 feet tall leaped forth before landing on the ground nearby, causing the entire earth to tremor with the immensely heavy impact. Most of the people in the plaza turned toward the giant figure, and all of them drew a sharp breath in unison. From the head down, this giant figure possessed a body that was half flesh and half metal. The metal half was of a glistening black color and was emanating a peculiar gray light, while the other half of his body was of a tanned, deep bronze color, and it seemed to be just as indestructible as his metallic half. The head attached to this body had a sinister set of facial features. Not only were his nose and eyes twice as large as that of a normal human, his head was conical in shape, with a few sporadic tufts of green hair growing on top. Han Li swept his spiritual sense toward the strange being, upon which his expression changed drastically. He was completely unable to fathom his cultivation base, thereby indicating that this was a being at the pinnacle of the body integration stage, just like Kai and Jizzy. However, just because Han Li didn't recognize this strange being didn't mean that the other foreign beings gathered here didn't recognize him. Almost as soon as he landed on the ground, a dozen or so beings rushed out of the nearby crowd before extending a respectful bow toward him. "We pay our respects to Elder Duan." A string of greetings immediately rang out. These humanoid figures were far taller and larger than normal humans, and they were all stone cocoon beings like Tai Jian. As such, This strange being had to be an elder of the stone cocoon race. "Oh, I see you've all come here to attend the auction as well. I wish you all good luck. I was swindled into risking my life for a fake treasure, so I don't even feel like staying for the auction anymore." The strange being waved a casual, dismissive hand toward all of the other stone cocoon beings before making his way toward the exit. All of the beings in his path naturally stepped aside in a respectful manner to grant him passage. Coincidentally, this elder Duan also happened to pass by Han Li, and Han Li shuffled back a little as well, planning to see off this astonishingly powerful being. However, in the next instant, an alarming turn of events abruptly unfolded. In the instant that elder Duan passed by Han Li, his footsteps suddenly faltered, and his nose twitched before he turned an intense, incredulous gaze toward Han Li. All of the nearby beings were naturally quite taken aback by this sudden development, and many of them turned to Han Li as well, trying to determine what it was about him that had caught the interest of such a powerful being. "Do you have any business with me, Senior?" Han Li was struck by a sense of foreboding, but he still extended a respectful salute as he squeezed a smile onto his face. "What's your name and which race are you from?" Han Li didn't know what this being's intentions were, so he naturally didn't dare to speak the truth. As such, he fabricated a response on the spot. "Good, I am Duan Tianren of the Stone Cocoon race. If you encounter any troubles in Cloud City, you can refer to me as your backer." Elder Duan nodded with a meaningful expression, and it was impossible to tell whether he believed Han Li's fib. All of a sudden, his body blurred before reverting back to normal, but Han Li's expression changed drastically. He could clearly sense that in the instant that Duan Tianren's body had blurred, he had thrust a palm lightly onto Han Li's shoulder. With his spirit eye ability, he was able to see the trajectory of Duan Tianren's palm, but he was simply too fast for Han Li to evade. A burst of strange spiritual qi flowed from Duan Tianren's palm into his arm, and it only dissipated after circulating throughout his entire arm. "What's the meaning of this, Senior?" An enraged look appeared on Han Li's face. There were only a dozen or so beings present that had actually caught sight of what Duan Tianren had done to Han Li, so to everyone else, it appeared that Han Li had suddenly gotten angry, even though Duan Tianren was clearly extending a gesture of kindness toward him. In the face of Han Li's enraged interrogation, Duan Tianren merely swept his gaze over Han Li's face as he chuckled. "Rest assured, fellow Taoist, I could see that you'd also cultivated quite a special body refinement technique, so I wanted to see what that was all about." After Duan Tianren's gaze had swept past his face, Han Li was stunned to find that his face began to throb with pain. He had used that black veil in conjunction with a disguise technique to conceal his original appearance, but there was simply too much of a cultivation-based disparity between the two of them, so Han Li confident in the slightest that he'd fooled Duan Tianren. However, Han Li naturally wasn't going to believe the excuse that Duan Tianren had offered to placate him, and his mind raced as he attempted to glean the intentions behind that palm. However, he was unable to think of any potential reasons why this being would target him. After all, this was most definitely the first time that he'd met him. At this moment, Duan Tianren suddenly transmitted his voice to Han Li. "Save your brain cells, little fella. I'll be waiting for you at the rich aroma pavilion across the street. Don't even think about getting away. I didn't intend to harm you with that palm, but with my residual spiritual qi circulating within your body, I'll be able to detect your location within the next few hours." After that, he gave no further explanations before departing with a hearty laugh. Moments later, he left the plaza and strode into the exit, leaving behind a befuddled Han Li, as well as a bunch of bemused beings who were all looking at him with peculiar expressions. Han Li was struggling to calm himself down in the wake of what had just happened, and the widespread scrutiny he was receiving certainly wasn't helping matters. Thus, he also turned and made his way toward the exit. Han Li had originally planned to disguise himself, before selling off some of his spirit medicine and spirit herbs in exchange for spirit stones. However, after what had just happened, he had become the center of everyone's attention, so he naturally wouldn't be able to act according to his initial plan. As such, following a brief moment of contemplation, he departed from the side hall, seemingly in a calm manner. He then arrived at a plot of empty land reserved for beast-drawn carriages to park at, then cast a solemn gaze across the street. When he had first arrived, he hadn't noticed this so-called rich aroma pavilion, but now that he was actively searching for it, he discovered that there really was such a place. The pavilion wasn't very large, but it was situated almost directly across from the auction house. The building was 3 levels tall, and there was a sign hanging above the door with flowing and elegant text inscribed upon it. After a brief moment of observation, Han Li discovered that in contrast with all of the other nearby buildings, which were all quite lively and bustling, there was no one entering or exiting the pavilion at all. This was the place that Duan Tianren had asked him to go to. Han Li was feeling rather hesitant about how to proceed. The auction wasn't going to commence for some time, and before ascertaining Duan Tianren's true intentions, he wouldn't be able to focus on the auction anyway. As such, he suddenly rustled a sleeve, and his hand reached out from within as he appraised it in an expressionless manner. The hand was inky black in color, and it was none other than the hand in which the divine essence-effused mountain had been infused. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly. Duan Tianren had done his best to disguise this, but through the use of his spirit eye ability, Han Li was still able to see that his gaze had almost been focused entirely on this sleeve of his. However, he didn't know whether it was just his hand that had caught Duan Tianren's interest or his entire arm instead. If it were the former, then he was most likely interested in the divine essence-effused mountain, but if it were the latter, Han Li's heart sank slightly as a realization dawned on him. At the thought of his arm, Han Li abruptly raised his other hand and stroked a certain section of his arm through his sleeve. Even though he couldn't sense anything amiss in that arm, it was undeniably true that the longsword that the profound heavenly fruit had transformed into was sealed within his arm. Could it be that Duan Tianren had managed to detect the existence of that sword? Han Li was growing more and more uneasy as he followed this train of thought. He was still oblivious to the fact that the many races, including the human race and the flying spirit race, had been indirectly affected by this profound heavenly treasure, and nor was he aware that some smaller races had even been entirely slain to facilitate a blood sacrifice due to this. However, he had witnessed the power of the sword in person, and he knew that if he could use the sword at will someday without crippled by it, he'd essentially be invincible in the spirit realm. As such, even though he had only used the sword once, it had already become one of his biggest secrets, second only to that mysterious small vial, and it was even more important to him than his mature gold-devouring beetles. However, it wasn't very likely that this stone cocoon race elder had actually managed to detect the presence of the profound heavenly treasure within his body. Otherwise, Kyan Jizzy would have been able to detect it as well. Even though the profound heavenly treasure was sealed within his arm, even he couldn't detect its presence unless attempted to wield it. Of course, it wasn't impossible that Duan Tianren possessed some kind of special secret technique that allowed him to detect the profound heavenly treasure. In any case, he was no match for a being at the pinnacle of the body integration stage as he currently was, and even without the wisp of spiritual power that Duan Tianren had injected into his body, it would be next to impossible for him to escape from the heavily guarded Cloud City anyway. Hence, he essentially had no choice but to do as he was told regardless of whether it would spell fortune or disaster for him. Thus, after hesitating for a long while, Han Li finally gritted his teeth and made his way toward the rich aroma pavilion. Thankfully, even if Duan Tianren really were interested in his profound heavenly treasure, there was no immediate threat to his life. Han Li made his way into the rich aroma pavilion in a slightly resigned manner to find that there was a handsome young crystal being standing inside by the entrance. This was a core formation stage crystal being, and he immediately greeted Han Li with a smile as he said, "Senior Li, right? Elder Duan has already been waiting in the 4th VIP booth for a long time. Please come with me, Senior." Han Li glanced around at the first level of the pavilion, and a hint of surprise appeared in his eyes, but he merely nodded and said, "Lead the way." The entire hall around him was completely empty without any ornaments or furniture at all, and the walls were constructed from some kind of unknown material that was flashing with faint blue light. Thus, the crystal being led Han Li up a staircase, and a short while later, Han Li found himself on the 3rd floor of the pavilion, standing in front of a booth that was enshrouded under faint golden light. The crystal being stopped there and made a hand seal before raising a hand toward the door of the booth. A burst of silver light immediately shot forth from within his sleeve, following which he stepped away to the side in a respectful manner. Moments later, a voice sounded from within the booth. "Seeing as you're already here, then come in." Han Li was rather bewildered to hear this voice, as it belonged to a woman. Right at this moment, golden flashed up ahead. The door to the booth slowly opened of its own accord. After a brief hesitation, Han Li strode into the booth, and the door swung shut again amid another flash of golden light. I pay my respects to my two seniors. Han Li cupped his fist in a calm salute after cast his gaze around the booth. This was an antiquated room that was over 100 feet in size, and there were two beings sitting beside a table in there. One of them was Duan Tianren, while the other was a crystal race beauty who appeared to be in her 30s, and she was at the early body integration stage. The female voice that Han Li had heard earlier undoubtedly belonged to this woman. "No need for excessive formalities, fellow Taoist Li. Please take a seat," the woman said with a smile. Meanwhile, Duan Tianren was pouring wine directly into his mouth from a pink wine flagon, and he showed no sign of stopping even as he glanced at Han Li out of the corner of his eye. Even for Han Li, who very rarely consumed alcoholic beverages, the rich, fragrant aroma emanating from the wine was quite tempting to him. Thus, after extending another respectful salute, Han Li took a seat on one of the other chairs in the booth. At this moment, the woman turned to appraise Han Li, and he could sense that her gaze paused momentarily when it traveled to his sleeve. It appeared that Duan Tianren had to have told her something. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly, and he felt as if he had landed himself in a lot of hot water. All of the crystal beings were extremely intelligent, and high-grade crystal beings that could cultivate to the body integration stage were all supremely prodigious beings. As such, it wouldn't be easy to try and swindle these two. Duan Tianren finally finished the contents of the entire wine flagon before wiping his mouth with his sleeve as he said, "All right, he's here, and I've told you everything I need to tell you. The rest is up to you now, Fairy Kai. I'm just a thick-skulled idiot, so using my brain certainly isn't my forte, but I have to get the biggest share out of the things that we obtain in the end." "There's no rush, Brother Duan. I've only heard a verbal account from you, so I have to verify the specific details for myself," the woman said with a smile. "You can do whatever you want. In any case, I've verified it in person, and I'm sure it's real. By the way, your 9-fragrant spirit wine is becoming more and more delectable by the day. Get me another flagon, will you?" Duan Tianren waved the empty wine flagon in his hand in a demanding manner. "You really think my rich aroma pavilion is a pub, Brother Duan? It takes 100 years just to brew around 10 jugs of this 9-aroma spirit wine, and you've already drunk 3 flagons. Next time you come here, I can only bring out some ordinary spirit wine for you." The woman rolled her eyes at Duan Tianren, but she still complied in the end. A green wine jug appeared in her hands amid a flash of spiritual light, and she refilled the pink wine flagon in Duan Tianren's hand. "Haha, that's because you're the only one in Cloud City who knows how to brew this wine. I've asked to purchase the brewing method from you on several occasions, but you refused to sell it to me. It really is quite strange how you're able to brew the finest spirit wine in the entire Cloud City when you don't even drink wine yourself," Duan Tianren said with an amused smile after downing another large mouthful of wine. "I never proclaimed that my wine is the best in Cloud City. This is merely an honorary title given to me by other fellow Taoists. On top of that, I'm not refusing to give you the brewing method because I'm stingy. Instead, it's because the brewing method is closely related to the cultivation arts that I'm using, so you wouldn't be able to brew this 9-aroma spirit wine even if I were to give you the method," the woman chuckled. Duan Tianren merely smiled in response, before continuing to chug down wine without offering a reply. Meanwhile, the woman flipped a hand over to produce a fist-sized golden cup, which she filled with wine from her jug before offering it to Han Li. The cup was enveloped by a ball of green light and slowly hovered toward him. "The fact that you've come here today shows that you must have some affinity with my rich aroma pavilion. Why don't you have some 9-aroma spirit wine as well?" the woman said with a smile as Han Li reflexively caught the cup of wine. "Thank you, Senior," Han Li replied in a grateful manner, but he didn't immediately down the contents of the cup. Instead, he looked down at the golden cup in his hand to find that this so-called 9-aroma spirit wine was translucent and viscous, and slightly pink in color. With the golden cup acting as a backdrop, it was as if he were holding a mesmerizing miniature lake filled with agate rocks. There was also a unique aroma wafting from the wine in the cup, and as he took a faint whiff, the aroma changed several times in an instant, presenting quite an extraordinary phenomenon. "Not only is my spirit wine extremely aromatic, consumption of it can clear the eyes and cleanse the body. Each and every mouthful of wine can save you over a month of arduous cultivation," the woman introduced. "I'm extremely fortunate to be able to taste such extraordinary wine." At this point, Han Li had also ascertained that the wine in the cup hadn't been tampered with, so he raised the cup to his lips to take a sip. He felt as if a block of glacial ice had entered his mouth, immediately following which the block of ice melted and turned into a warm liquid that extremely smooth and aromatic. The captivating aroma then slid down his throat and into his stomach, even without the need for Han Li to actively swallow. All of a sudden, Han Li felt a scorching sensation in his dantian, which then spread through his limbs, meridians, and all over his body to create an extremely comfortable sensation. Han Li closed his eyes to savor the aftertaste of the wine for a long while before finally praising in a heartfelt manner, "This wine is indeed extraordinary. This is the first time I've had such delectable spirit wine." If that weren't the case, then I wouldn't come here every year to beg for wine," Duan Tianren chortled heartily. "It is a great honor for me that you too enjoy my spirit wine. However, we didn't invite you here just to drink wine, fellow Taoist Han," the woman said with a smile. Han Li's heart stirred upon hearing this, and he put down his cup as he asked, "I'm also quite curious. Why did you and Senior Duan ask me to come here?" "Seeing as you've raised the question, I won't waste any more time. Fellow Taoist Li, would you be able to roll up that sleeve so I can see your hand?" the woman asked with a peculiar look on her face. "My hand?" Han Li feigned a surprised expression, but he actually heaved a long sigh of relief internally. It appeared that these two weren't after his profound heavenly treasure. "Indeed, I'd like to see your hand," the woman confirmed as she pointed at Han Li's sleeve. "All right, no problem," Han Li reluctantly agreed after a long hesitation. He then rolled up his sleeve to reveal his hand, and it appeared to be no different from the average human hand. The woman's brows furrowed upon seeing this, following which the crystal on her glabella flashed as a streak of silver light shot forth. The streak of light hurtled through the air at an astonishing speed, reaching Han Li in the blink of an eye before stabbing down with ferocious might toward the hand that Han Li had just unveiled. Letter 1D65B, letter 1D4FB, letter 1D486, letter 1D4E, letter 1D498, letter 1D65A, letter 1D4EC, letter 1D490, letter 1D662. The woman appeared to be quite warm and gentle, but she was attacking without any premonition in a display that completely belied her appearance. Han Li was completely caught off guard by this attack, and he reflexively spread his fingers apart before grabbing toward the silver streak of light. The silver light struck his palm with a loud clang, following which the sound of metal grating on metal rang out. Han Li then grabbed onto the silver streak of light before unfurling his fingers to reveal a silver needle that was several inches in length. The needle was shimmering with translucent light and trembling slightly in his hand, seemingly possessing extremely abundant spiritual nature. At this moment, Han Li's entire hand had already turned a glossy black color, as if it had been forged entirely from black iron. On top of that, a shimmering silver miniature mountain insignia had appeared on the back of his hand, and that was none other than a manifestation of the divine essence-effused mountain. After mastering the 100 Meridian Refinement mantra, the mountain had completely fused as one with his hand, so despite the lethality of the silver needle that the woman had unleashed, there was no way that it would wound him. However, Han Li wasn't triumphant in the slightest to have withstood that attack. Instead, his expression darkened significantly. In contrast, the crystal woman was staring at his black hand with undisguised excitement in her eyes, and Duan Tianren also wore an elated expression on his face. "You really do possess an acquired essence-effused body. In that case, we'll be able to achieve our objective," the woman murmured to herself before raising a hand, and the silver needle escaped Han Li's grasp before flying back to her. In the end, the needle disappeared into the crystal on her glabella in a flash. Han Li took a deep breath to compose himself before asking, "What do you mean by essence-effused body, Senior?" An essence-effused body naturally refers to someone capable of using the divine essence-effused light. Seeing as you've fused an essence-effused treasure with your body, you technically possess an acquired essence-effused body. Speaking of which, this cultivation art that allows you to fuse a treasure into your body is quite similar in effect to the cultivation art you're using, fellow Taoist Duan. The only difference is that instead of treasures, you fuse all types of precious tool refinement materials into your body instead, brother Duan. The woman seemed to be in very high spirits. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon hearing this, but he didn't ask any questions. He knew that the woman would definitely explain the situation to him anyway, even if he didn't ask her anything. As expected, seeing as Han Li wasn't saying anything, the woman continued, Even though we've essentially confirmed that you possess an essence-effused body, I still want to see you release your divine essence-effused light. You wouldn't turn down that request from me, would you, fellow Taoist Li? Instead of answering the question, Han Li merely waved a hand before him, and a layer of gray light instantly surfaced to create a light barrier around his body. The woman's eyes lit up upon seeing this, and she rubbed her hands together before raising them toward Han Li. A string of spluttering sounds rang out, following which several crimson fireballs flew toward him. Initially, they were only fist-sized fireballs, but not long after they left her hand, they swelled to the size of human heads and seemed to be quite powerful as well. Han Li looked on at these fireballs and displayed no intent to evade them, merely allowing them to strike his gray light barrier in quick succession instead. As soon as the fireballs came into contact with the gray light barrier, they disappeared amid dull thumps like sandcastles in the rising tide, completely vanishing before they could unleash any power. There's no mistaking it. Divine essence-effused light combats the power of the 5 elements. From the ease with which you're using your divine essence-effused light, I can tell that you've clearly cultivated it to the maximal extent, and your mastery of it is no less proficient than in those who are born with essence-effused bodies. What do you think, fellow Taoist Duan? The woman clapped her hands with elation before turning to Duan Tianren. A peculiar light flashed through Duan Tianren's eyes upon hearing this, and he suddenly made a grabbing motion toward Han Li. Several large runes flashed from his fingertips, following which a vast expanse of gray light surged forth, sweeping directly toward Han Li. Divine essence-effused light, Han Li exclaimed with alarm as he looked on at the familiar gray light surging toward him. He then reflexively made a hand seal, and brilliant light erupted from the gray light barrier around the body as it prepared to withstand Duan Tianren's divine essence-effused light. Immediately thereafter, the 2 bursts of gray light flashed amid a string of strange crackling noises. Even though both bursts of light were gray in color, it was not impossible to tell the difference between the two. It was quite clear that the color of Duan Tianren's divine essence-effused light was slightly darker, but it was clearly more volatile and unstable, as if he were unable to completely control it as he pleased. A hint of surprise flashed through Han Li's eyes, and after a brief pause for contemplation, he suddenly pointed an inky black finger toward the gray light up ahead. All of the divine essence-effused light suddenly converged toward the center to form a large ball of light that rapidly rotated on the spot. An astonishing scene then ensued. The gray light unleashed by Duan Tianren seemed to have encountered a massive vortex, and it all disappeared into the ball of light in a flash. All right, that's enough. Even though fellow Taoist Li's essence-effused body is an acquired one, it's quite clear that he's far more proficient in using the divine essence-effused light than you are, Brother Duan. Tusk, his level of mastery is no different from that of a being naturally born with an essence-effused body, the woman remarked with a wide smile. HMPH, of course that's the case. My divine essence-effused light is only released from forcibly using my magic power to activate the essence-effused stones that I've fused with my body, so there's no way it can compare with fellow Taoist Li's divine essence-effused light. Tusk, speaking of which, your secret art to fuse treasures with your body is quite extraordinary, fellow Taoist Li. Duan Tianren clicked his tongue with wonder. It's quite fortunate that you fused a large quantity of essence-effused stones into my body. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been able to detect the essence-effused treasure within fellow Taoist Li's body, the woman said with a smile. Han Li was left a little speechless upon hearing this. At this moment, Duan Tianren raised a hand to withdraw the divine essence-effused light that he'd released, then lowered his arm in a calm manner. Han Li also made a hand seal to withdraw the silver light around him before asking, "There must be a reason why you hold this ability in such high regard, right, Senior?" "We do have our reasons, of course. In all honesty, we've waited thousands of years for someone capable of wielding the divine essence-effused light, but we were still unable to gather enough people, so we'd originally already given up. Who would have thought that you'd appear us at this juncture to rekindle our hopes?" the woman replied with an excited gleam in her eyes. "Gather enough people. Does that mean you found others with the essence-effused body as well?" Han Li was quite surprised to hear this. "Of course. We'll have to tell you everything eventually, so I'll fill you in now. We have an objective that we want to achieve, and only beings with mastery of the divine essence-effused light can achieve it, but one person alone definitely isn't enough. After searching for thousands of years, Brother Duan and I have found 3 beings with the essence-effused body, including yourself," the woman explained. The divine essence-effused light isn't a unique secret cultivation art, but it's most definitely extremely rare, so we weren't confident at all that we'd be able to gather enough people. But it appears that the heavens have blessed us with immense fortune. The woman continued with a smile. All right, I now understand why I was invited here, but how may I be of assistance to you, Senior? Hanley asked with a wry smile. That's quite an important matter, and I can only reveal the specific details to you after discussing some things with Brother Dewan. However, one thing is for sure. We'll need you to do something for us, and we'll require your services at several years to a century from now, the woman replied. What, several years to a century? Han Li's brows furrowed upon hearing this familiar time frame. Is there something wrong, fellow Taoist Li? The crystal woman asked. Han Li was silent for a long while before a peculiar look appeared on his face, and he asked, does this have something to do with the vast glacial realm?